There were times when he appeared unflappable, looking, as Dan Jenkins wrote in Golf Digest, like the guy you sent out to kill James Bond. To say no golfer lost more than Greg Norman is imprecise, because there were scores of golfers who didn't even sniff a chance to win majors. Before Tiger Woods, Norman's 331 weeks atop the world ranking was a record. We should all be such losers. Still, if you define losing as standing alluringly close to a prize and failing to capture it, then Norman lost. If losing is when the prevailing emotion afterwards is regret, then Norman was in a class of his own. That quote is from Sam Wyman of Golf Digest in his 2016 book, Win at Losing.
Beautifully read, Jamie, and not only, apropos for our topic today, but a tremendous Sam Wyman impression, I thought. You sounded exactly like him. Sam is our boss, we should say. But no, I think Sam should think about maybe changing his own voice to the buttery Scottish tones that you deployed there, Jamie.
Yeah, I kind of feel like AI could do that for Sam, so we'll see. Welcome to the 50 Things That Changed Golf, a Golf Digest podcast that dives deep into the events and moments that shape the game we all love. In today's episode, we are, of course, talking about Greg Norman, and specifically, or infamously, the 1996 Masters. And you heard from him there. My foursomes partner to relive the heartbreak is Shane Ryan. Shane, take us back to 1996. Where was a young Shane Ryan?
Yeah, still 3 years from being born, and so I don't have a direct memory of the time period we're talking about. No, Jamie, I was 13 years old. And I believe I was in 8th grade. I don't think I was in high school yet. At this time in golf, I didn't play golf, but I was, very tuned into it and have a memory. I do have a specific memory from the time of watching this tournament. So this is really time machine stuff for me. What about you?
Well, I was a little younger. I was 11. I'd actually just joined my first golf club. And I remember watching the event here in Scotland. The BBC would show highlights. I think it came on about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So one of those rare occasions to stay up late and watch the horror film that unfolded. So that's where I was. But before we start into the recap, Shane, we've got a few categories, as you know, where I'll lay them out for our listeners and they can see what is to come up. So we're going to drop in some awards, some categories throughout the podcast. The first one is the what if moment, maybe the tipping point or moment that could have changed it all. We've got the best quote, headline, or tweet that we can pull from our research. We have best supporting actor or actress that comes up throughout. We have the Kim Jong-un Award for the most unbelievable stat in honor of his 1994 claim that he made 11 hole-in-ones in his first ever round of golf. Then, Shane, we have to decide on a piece of memorabilia we would want from this event or era. And then lastly, the unintended consequence. So look out for those popping up throughout and then recapped at the end. But Shane, maybe to kick off, how about I put us in a time machine, take us back to 1996 and give you a sense of the world back then?
I would love that, Jamie. And, simpler time in a lot of ways, 30 years ago at this point. So I don't know if I remember much. So I would love to hear what was happening in the world.
So in 1996, Shane, Primal Fear with Richard Gere was a number one movie, a classic, a favorite of yours, I believe.
I love it. Are the posters in frame or no? I don't know if people can see, but
we can
frame.
We'll fix that in post. But we're a month away from the first Mission Impossible movie. President at the time is, of course, Bill Clinton. He is allegedly having sexual relations with an intern at this time, but we don't need to go into that. That won't come out for another few years. Celine Dion is the number one artist in the single charts with Because You Loved Me, so maybe we can do a rendition of that later on. Shane, we're a few months away from the Macarena entering our lives.
Yes,
if that puts you back in 1996, there you go.
What a time.
Yep. Pete Sampras is the world number one tennis player. He's reigning US Open and Wimbledon champion, just reaching his peak. The Dallas Cowboys have just won the Super Bowl. That would be the last Super Bowl they've won up until this point. So apropos there. And then we're a couple of months removed from one of the most famous NBA drafts in sports history. The likes of Kobe Bryant, Ray Allen, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash all got drafted. So that gives you a sense of the era that we were in.
Well, Jamie, I'm shocked. There's one you left off, which just less than a month before this Masters, the winner of the Best Picture at the Oscars was Braveheart, which I know all Scottish people love and recognize as a very, perfectly accurate depiction of their culture.
There's a true story that at university in the States, my party trick used to be to get up on a chair and do the Braveheart speech. So
really, okay.
Maybe if we're dry later and we want to avoid the heartbreak, I'll break back into that. So.
Fast forward 5 minutes, we're out of material. Jamie, do the Braveheart speech.
Do it.
I did that, and I also just so we don't seem like an American-centric podcast, I looked up, and a man named John Major was the Prime Minister of the UK. I know very little about. I have heard the name before, but that's all I can tell you is his name, Jamie.
Very bland man, very bland name. Yeah, okay. We can move on. Why don't you give us a sense of golf in this time, Shane?
Well, golf, Jamie, this is looking back, it was more fascinating than I was led to believe, or than I originally thought, I should say. So first off, this stat kind of blew my mind. Ernie Els is the only player in the top 10, Jamie, who is under the age of 35. So this is very much an era of older established stars. It's also an era of international players. But to give you a comparison, and today, if you look at the top 10 now, Justin Rose is the only really old guy. He's number 10. Everybody else is 36 or younger. So if the number was 36, Rory's 36 and Russell Henley's 36, but everybody else is younger than that. So kind of interesting difference there. Now, I want to talk to you also specifically about the Masters, because what a 3-year stretch we had from 95 to 97 with Greg Norman's Masters being right in the middle. So a year earlier, Ben Crenshaw won the Masters, and I don't know. I do have a specific memory of what a sentimental win that was. Almost Harvey Penick, his coach, had just died, and this was like the feel good story that and it's almost forgotten now, or you don't hear about it as much anymore. But that was big. And then of course we're going to talk about Norman, and then the year after in '97, I can't remember what happened, but I feel like it was something big. Maybe we'll talk about that later.
Maybe there'll be an episode on that. We'll see.
Maybe there'll be an episode on that. But then I think a good little window into where things are is to look at the other majors from the year before of 95. Of course, the Masters was the first of 96. So at the Open Championship, this is the John Daly, Costantino Rocca British Open, where it's so dramatic and Daly ends up winning after Rocca hits that big putt. At the U.S. Open, Corey Pavin wins. This is at Shinnecock. We will maybe talk about this a little bit because Greg Norman also factored into that. And then at the PGA, another player that we sort of talk about in this Greg Norman, a little bit of difficulty under pressure, Colin Montgomery was defeated in a playoff by Steve Elkington. So there are a lot of good majors right around this 96 Masters. In fact, just reading those, you have to look at maybe 95 as if you were ranking the years of, modern majors, it would have to be right up there.
It was a great year. I have to say, just because every time you bring up Scotland, I feel like I'm going to shout and say something, but actually you'll be amazed at this. Data Golf actually go back and rank players in this era, although it was way before that. Do you know who the number one ranked golfer in Data Golf was entering the 1996 Masters?
Oh my goodness! If it's not Norman, I have no idea.
Colin Montgomery was the number one. So there you go. Just might be the only chance I get to shout out Monty on this podcast. So there you go.
There you go. Well, and then just some other quick stuff for you. Kari Webb that year in '96, Jamie, she's going to earn $1 million in a season, which would be the first time a woman had ever done that. Annika Sorenstam had just won her first major, so she's a new name that people are going, oh, she could be really good. And then there was a Ryder Cup. This was the last kind of really big event before this Masters, was a Ryder Cup in Oak Hill. And I like to think of myself as something of a Ryder Cup expert. This is one of those really under-the-radar Ryder Cups at Oak Hill. It's a very close one. It's 4 years after War by the Shore, 4 years before Brookline. And this one was won by the Europeans. They were down going into Sunday, and they came back on the road, which they would never do again. No, they would do that. They would famously do that again. And also, Jamie, here's one last one for you. The Golf Channel launched at the start of 1995, so we're only a year into the Golf Channel era.
Probably gives you a sense of just how much coverage golf is getting at this time. So, I'll take you to the PGA Tour specifically because it might highlight somebody that we're about to talk about. So, who won the money list in 1995? That was, of course, Greg Norman. Who was Player of the Year in 1995? That was, of course, Greg Norman. And Greg Norman is also world number one. And it's interesting to point out the two characters we're probably going to talk about in the movie that was the 96 Masters. Norman and Faldo combined, by the time it got to the 96 Masters, had been world number one together longer than the rest of the world combined. So 10 years had gone past. They'd been world number one for something like 70% of those weeks. So you talk about where we're going to get to later on when we get to the Masters, just these two titans of that era. But Greg Norman was clearly world number one entering 1996. But before we go too far into 96, why don't you take us a little bit back before we get to Masters week and tell us some of the origin of this great white shark?
Yeah, and Greg Norman is the hero of our story, the tragic hero in some ways. And I think with any hero, we want to find out where they come from. And I think, Jamie, our hardest task will be, this is 30 years on, which seems crazy. Our hardest task is going to be framing who Greg Norman was in 96 and what people thought of him and where he stood and all that. I do think I want to throw some facts at you from his childhood. We don't need to go too crazy here, but I've got 10 facts. I've distilled it down to 10, and I would love to hear your reaction to all of them. But these are what I've determined are the most important. Like, this is, again, if we're writing this movie script, these are the beats that we have to hit. So number one, we talk about Greg Norman's appearance. His parents are Nordic. His mother is Finnish. His father is this mix of like Dutch and Norwegian and all this stuff. But I think that, when I think of how Norman looks, I once described him as if you were making a movie about, like an 80s ski movie, he would be the villain. He would be the bad guy. Like, he'd be the rich bad guy, very good looking, blonde hair. But I think maybe this transforms it a little bit. Maybe we go away from the villain idea into this man has Viking blood, right? Maybe this is like sort of a conquering hero, and this is where he comes from. So
yeah, the prequel to the Norman story might be pretty interesting. So
yeah. Maybe we go all the way back to the Viking era and see who his forebears were. Yeah. Number two, he grew up in a perfectly named town called Townsville. So, yeah, this is a very clever town name there. He was always, Jamie, reef diving. He was always spear fishing, surfing, roasting his food outdoors. And he's also a terrible student. But that is kind of like, we need to picture Greg Norman as this outdoorsy, kind of like, I don't know, Hardy Boys adventure kid.
Yeah, I think almost every picture you see of Norman as a kid, he's shirtless. And even as an adult, if you look at his Instagram. But it's funny, as a child in Scotland, I probably didn't remove the top layer of my clothing until I was about 16. But he's as a boy, he was shirtless, fishing and on boats and playing sports. So that's kind of sadly my image of Norman as a kid.
Yeah, and now it's egotistical. You feel like when you see it on Instagram. At the time, I do really genuinely do think it's just he never wore a shirt. What a big day that must have been for you, Jamie, taking your shirt off for the first time at 16.
It was huge. It was huge.
So the next thing, fact number 3, Jamie, he was always saving lives. Greg Norman was going around saving lives as a kid. He saved a friend who was drowning at the bottom of a pool. He saved his sister when she was apparently in the arms of a giant jellyfish. Okay, so he's a legitimate hero, but also on the sad side of things, he was jogging with a friend one time, and the friend just keeled over and died. And when everybody came to the hospital, Greg Norman had to be the one to tell the mother. So it's this outrageous childhood filled with very, very dramatic events. And my take on that is I don't know if it is truly dramatic or is that just Australia?
I was going to say.
Yeah. If you live in Australia, is it the case that you either die or that you save someone from death by the time you're 12 years old? I don't know.
A rite of passage for all young men.
Yeah. Oh, you haven't saved anybody's life yet? You're 13. What are you doing? Number 4, Jamie, his father, Merv, was a very serious man. This is an engineer, and he wanted Greg Norman to be an engineer. He owned his own company at one point. He wanted Greg to follow in his footsteps. And there are all these stories, like in Lawrence St. John's biography of Greg Norman. There's a story that Greg needed help with his math homework one time, and his father, uniquely positioned among fathers to where he could actually help him, right? Unlike most of us, and he would just say, go figure it out on your own, right? So there was this kind of sternness to him, a sense of you got to earn your way in life, nothing is given to you. And to put on my Sigmund Freud hat for a moment, Jamie, I wonder if in the future this need for your father's approval, seeking your father's approval and not getting it factors into how Greg Norman would behave with other things. One story that always comes to mind is long before Live, when he tried to lead a PGA Tour revolt, there's this great scene where they all come into this conference room and he's trying to get everybody to start this international tour. And Arnold Palmer walks in and just dismisses him with a word. And I'm like, there it is. There's your father not giving the approval and just kind of devastating you.
Yeah, I think we'll get into it later, but there's so many of the quotes that Norman has kind of in his golfing life and his peak and the events that we're going to cover. And So many of them harken back to this point of him either trying to prove something. It turns into proving something to the media, but clearly it was built as proving something to himself and maybe other people. So I like you diving deep into golfers' heads. I want more of that.
Now, fact number 5 is quite a bit shorter, Jamie, but long before he was the Shark, he had 3 different nicknames as a kid. And I want you to tell me which is your favorite. The Milky Bar Kid, the Strawberry Bull, and Buster.
Buster. That's
Buster.
that. I don't think it's not my favorite, but that's just the most odd one. I'd love to know the origin story of Buster, but yeah, I think I'd take Milky Bar Kid. I quite like the Milky Bar Kid riding into Augusta or something, but.
And then we go to number 6, Jamie. His, he's trying to become a pro. His father is very disapproving of him. At one point, he goes to the capital, Sydney, to take a job. This doesn't work out. He's around 18 years old. So he's coming back with his tail between his legs. You have to look at it like the low moment in Greg Norman's early career. And as he's driving back to Brisbane to his family, he runs over a kangaroo. He just kills a kangaroo in his car.
We might need a category that's called Because Australia, but that would fall perfectly in line with that. I didn't see that coming, so that's
That's in our movie, I think that's the point where he gets out of his car and shakes his fist at God, maybe.
Yeah. And then it's the fast forward 7 years probably from then. I enjoy that, yeah.
Number 7, his surf career ends on this very dramatic day. I want to read you a sentence from Lawrence St. John's book, quote, "The surf was high, rising up in a towering wall of indigo and foam, and then crashing lustily into the rocks." And Greg Norman is sitting there watching this, and Greg Norman loves a lusty wave. It's his favorite thing. And so he gets out there and he says, I've got to do this. I've got to get in and surf. He jumps in. He goes straight into this massive wave. He gets thrown in the washing machine all around the seafloor, barely claws his way back to the surface, swept out to sea a half mile. He's trying to swim. Even Greg Norman, this great athlete, he tries to swim. He barely gets back. He's like 19 years old at this point, Jamie. He never surfs again.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, this is a man that later is almost going to take his own life with a chainsaw. So maybe something about the risk sort of attracted to him, and he might have retired from surfing, but he still was a bit of an adrenaline junkie, I think, later in life.
The way you said that, and I know this is not the case, it sounded like he's trying to kill himself on purpose with a chainsaw. Of all the ways to do it.
I don't know. I don't know all the details. I just know the aftermath, but...
Now, fact number 8, Jamie, there's a certain myth-making aspect to Greg Norman, which we've seen before. We've seen it with Seve Ballesteros. But, for instance, there's a story he used to like to tell where he was going to join the Air Force as a young 18-year-old, 17 years old. And he says he was in the office, poised with his pen above the paper, about ready to sign his life away. And then some kind of like signal came from the universe saying, don't do this. You can't do it. And he didn't sign. Well, the truth is, according to his mother in Lawrence St. John's book, that he actually went in with his dad for one meeting at the Air Force. The Air Force people were the ones who said, you got to finish high school. Don't join now. And then by the time he did finish high school, he had absolutely no interest in joining the Air Force. So I think that story is interesting insofar as it shows that like he was interested in building his legend, right? There is that aspect of Greg Norman's character.
Certainly ambition, but I like to think that he walked into the Air Force meeting with no shirt on and they just turned him away. But
so starting 2 years ago, the Australian Air Force does have to wear shirts.
Dress code, as we'll see, comes up in golf often as well.
The woke mob got to the Australian Air Force at that point. We must wear shirts. Fact number 9, Jamie, how he started golf was one morning after they moved to Brisbane. He's very lonely. All his friends are back in Townsville where he used to live. His mother says, I'm going to the course. I'm going to play golf. He says, for God's sake, let me caddy for you. I've got to do something. I've been making model airplanes in my room all day. I need to come with you. And that's how he gets into golf, because after she plays, he takes her clubs, he goes out and hits. And Jamie, at this point, he's like 16 years old. And I want to pause here because I think it's worth discussing how rare this is for any professional golfer to have started golf that late.
Yeah, I think, what is he, 15, 16 when he picks up a club and he goes and gets a handicap. He's 27, and then in 18 months he's down to a scratch. That's the sort of the story that he tells over and over again, which I think is actually fair from it's been told by other people as well. And that is bonkers. Me and you have spoken before, but he was pulled away from the town he was in. He was a big rugby player when he was young. He liked to play team sports, and he was sort of pulled away. So he was kind of lost and looking for something maybe subconsciously. And then this day on the golf course, he sort of took to it. And you can imagine him having a big build. He was a big guy. He was a big rugby player. He was strong. And so with a golf club in his hand, that sort of power that he had throughout his career was maybe born quite early. But the rise in terms of getting to scratch, he won his first professional golf tournament within 5 years of touching a golf club for the first time, which you think about the path that a lot of players take now through college, through whatever it is, it's pretty hard to believe.
It's incredible. Trying to come up with a comparison, I think the only other two high-level players I've heard of started that late were Larry Nelson, who served in the Vietnam War and started when he came back as age 19 or 20, and then Y.E. Yang actually was a very late starter. So it's almost totally unprecedented, and for the heights that Norman rose to, completely unprecedented. So there's that. Now, fact number 10, I'm going to throw a lot of things into one here, Jamie. Our last fact, by the time he goes over to Europe and he's starting to play professionally, as you mentioned, the rise is completely meteoric, but he's a little bit like a fish out of water. So there's a lot of stuff he has to be taught as this, rugged, shirtless Aussie going into the sophisticated world that you're familiar with, the UK, with the various snobberies and all that stuff. But no, so he's got to learn a lot. But also he kind of becomes, to hide his introversion, he becomes like a little bit surface cocky. He becomes very combative, or maybe he always had been, but there are these stories from his former agent that, he got in a fight, a traffic dispute. He got in a fight and punched the other driver. At the airports, if somebody bumped him, he would make a big deal out of it. He would, be willing to go into battle for that. So these sides of Norman's personality, these larger than life sides, are starting to break out. Some of it, I would argue for you, with you, is natural, but I also think, Jamie, some of it is a cover for what essentially was like a shy kid.
Yeah, he talks a lot in interviews when you go and watch about him. He describes himself as an introvert when he was young, and that may be true. It's not the sort of Greg Norman that we picture, this sort of fictional character that exists within the game, but maybe, like you say, this was a mask for it. And also having to break out of Australia, sort of try and make his way in America, you probably needed to have a sort of bravado. And he certainly had the look. I think in every element that we go through with research, I have like a note that was what he was wearing and what he looked like, because he was like a caricature of this Australian invasion into the game. It was amazing. But
so there you go, Jamie. There's your hero's origin story. And I think will be a nice segue into what we're going to do next, which is at some point this professional career, which starts so promising and of course is so successful, but at some point the narrative turns to struggle under pressure. It turns to heartbreak.
Yeah, indeed. And we're going to get to maybe the biggest heartbreak of them all. But before we do, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun here, and we would have a Greg Norman heartbreak draft. So the only rules are that it had to have taken place before the 1996 Masters. So we're going to pick 3 events each, quickly talk about them, and sort of lay some context as to where we're going to go. I think producer Greg, if you're on the line, you can tell us who's going to go first, and then we'll alternate picks, Shane.
I like that we need a producer. There's no way for us to determine who would go first.
It's not fair. We're trying to be very honorable men here.
Want the first pick? Yeah.
I gotta do something, Shane. Come on.
That's true. Yeah. Greg Snedeker is in his Greg Norman Brisbane era saying, "Mom, please take me golfing. Let me do anything."
You know what? For that comment, Shane, Jamie's going to go first.
Okay.
I wanted to go second, so joke's on you.
Okay, Shane, with the first pick in the Greg Norman Heartbreak Draft, Jamie Kennedy selects the 1987 Masters.
Yeah, of course.
So maybe the one that's sort of the most famous image of what happened. This is a year on from what we'll touch on is the Saturday Slam, where he leads all the majors after 54 holes. My style note here is this isn't early Norman. This is sort of mid-Norman, but he's got the hair, he's got flares, and he's got a gold chain throughout every round of this event. So just picture that as we go through this. But
Okay.
He opened with 73, 74, so he wasn't really in the mix. But then he shoots 66 and gets into the second to last group on Sunday, and it turns into just a total shootout. The leaderboard's great. It's a really good final round to go back and watch. He holds this huge putt on 17, about a 30-foot putt for birdie, and I can't tell if it's the old audio on the final round broadcast or if the cheer was that loud. But it is unbelievable, the cheer, the crowd that like cheering him on to the 18th green. It's just unbelievable. Then he goes down the last. He's got this putt to win. If you think of the famous Marco Mira putt, sort of pin high right, he is going in the whole way. It sort of drops just off the lower edge and misses. That putt was to win. Obviously, it doesn't go in. So we have a playoff. So it's him, it's Larry Mize, and it's Seve, all tied. So they start on 10. They go down 10. Seve 3 putts 10. The other 2 par. So we're going down 11. Larry Mize, who's a local boy, so there's a lot of that narrative being told. He blows his second shot so far right that he could almost play his tee shot to 12 from where this ball goes.
Okay.
Then Norman, who's miles past him, hits it just onto the fringe pin high. So you think this is advantage. I always think about this moment as being you're meant to expect your opponent to hole a shot, and I can never imagine that anybody from these positions would, but of course that's what happens. Mize holes out this sort of 50-yard pitch shot that's just unbelievable. In fact, if you go back through the event, Seve had the same shot during the final round in regulation, almost the exact same shot, and we're talking peak Seve. Seve pitches it onto the green, comes up about 10 feet short, and he misses the putt, so he makes bogey. Mize holes out, Norman misses his putt way low, and it is probably the biggest heartbreak in terms of singular shot that Norman faces in his career. So that I'm quite happy with my first pick.
Yeah, well done. That would have been my first pick too. Jamie, I'm going to go with the major just before this one, the 1986 PGA. We talked about the Saturday Slam that he did that year. This was the last of them, and this is the one where very famously, well, not as famously as Larry Mize, but nearly as famous, Bob Tway holes a bunker shot to devastate Greg Norman. But for me, the bigger story is this maybe is the closest comparison we have to what we're going to talk about, the 96 Masters. He's got a 4-shot lead after 54 holes, Greg Norman. Again, he had led every single major on a Saturday that year, but he shoots a 76. And so there are these two things that happen that maybe now is a good time to bring up this theme, Jamie, of was Greg Norman unlucky or did he put themselves in these positions? And these are two great examples where, okay, yeah, Bob Tway holds that shot from the bunker. Unbelievable. How does he do it? But Greg Norman did shoot a 76. And this, I think, is one of like the biggest debates we have about Greg Norman, because you can look at singular moments and think, oh, the universe is screwing him. But even with the Larry Mize example, right? He is in such a better position than him. He plays very conservatively on his second shot. He doesn't go for it. Even with that, you can talk about, like, what did he do? And I just want to throw this quote at you from his caddy, Bruce Edwards. Bruce Edwards told this story. We don't really know what tournament it was from. It's mistakenly attributed to the 96 Masters, but it wouldn't have been there. But anyway, they're at, late in some tournament. It seems to have involved Nick Faldo, and Norman had lost the lead, and he says to Bruce Edwards, well, I guess it's better to be lucky than good. And Edwards is furious, and he's shocked because, he felt that Faldo had outplayed Norman at whatever this tournament was, and he was really upset. And his response was, I just want to caddy for someone who has heart. So the relationship didn't last very long after that exchange. Yeah. But, I'm curious for your take, Jamie, because there are these two sides of the coin with Norman every time.
Yeah, he refers to luck a lot throughout his career, doesn't he? So when it doesn't go his way, maybe he's just, I didn't have the luck today, and very rarely does it go his way. And you're totally right. I think you remove those two shots from those first two that we've picked, and he still didn't really sort of finish the job, especially this one. I think he shot 40 on the back nine against Tway. Tway was playing in his first PGA, so he was definitely the sort of favorite going in and sort of let it go. And then Tway's, maybe gave him an excuse, certainly in the media afterwards, to play the luck card. But maybe another one that luck plays into or not for my second pick, Shane. I'm going to go a Masters before the one I just picked. We're going to spend a lot of time at Augusta, and we're going to go to 1986 Masters, which obviously is known for Jack's famous win, Jack winning his 6th green jacket. And maybe always forgotten is the fact that Norman led going into that final round. So Norman was leading by 1. He shoots 1 under on the front 9. So again, this isn't a sort of slow bleed. You think, oh, what's going on here? It's not too bad. But then on 10, and keep this in mind for later on, he hits a middle of the fairway, pulls his shot on 10, goes down the hill. That's going to come into play in 1996 as well. He makes double bogey on 10, and he's sort of losing his hold on the lead here. And this is when Nicklaus is going through those holes, 14, 15, 16. He's 4 back of Nicklaus when he's playing the 13th hole. He doesn't birdie the par 5 13th, but Shane, he birdies 14, 15, 16, and then pulls it way left into the trees on 17. So you think it's over. I promise you, everyone listening, go and look at this shot that Norman hits on 17. I would say this is arguably the most forgotten shot in major history. He's near the 7th hole, he hits it under the trees, rolls it up the green, hits it to about 10 feet, makes the birdie. So he's birdied 4 holes in a row to tie the lead. He's tied with Nicklaus. Nicklaus is done. Nicklaus obviously shot a lower round, so he's already finished. And then Norman makes a strange decision, takes 3 wood off the 18th tee. You'll see that if you go and watch 1987, he hit driver over the bunkers in 87. So he clearly had the power to do it. Chose 3 wood to lay up. He's between 4 iron and 5 iron. He picks the 4 iron, tries to sort of feather one in. And similar to Mize's shot and another shot that we're going to see later on, he hits this so far right, he's almost on the 10th tee, pretty tricky up and down. He doesn't get up and down, so he loses and Jack Nicklaus wins. And the best part of the broadcast is they don't even have Jack Nicklaus on camera. So when Jack Nicklaus wins, the commentating moment is Jack Nicklaus has won his 6 Masters. They cut to an image of Jack Nicklaus. They cut away from Norman and they cut just to an image. This image of Jack Nicklaus looking up as if he's won it somehow, like in his afterlife. But they do catch him later on. So Norman's going off having bogeyed the last. To him, maybe the biggest heartbreak. He doesn't know everything going on, but he can sense it. He has his chance to sort of par the last and maybe even birdie the last, and he bogeys it, playing it the wrong way. And then probably my favorite clip is Nicklaus walking towards Butler Cabin. The police are escorting him through the crowd, and this police officer's got his arm around Norman, smiling away, shaking his hand. And I just think everyone kind of wanted Nicklaus to win that week, and Norman didn't do it. But I think deep down, if you maybe ask him, that was probably one of the lowest heartbreak moments of his career, just with what happened there after birdieing 4 in a row, blowing it right on 18. So,
very good pick. Very good pick. I do want to say, we can talk about this in the break with our producer Greg, but this should have been a snake draft if it was fair. I just want to flag that as an objection.
I don't control everything.
You don't control everything. I'm going to go, and you may disagree with me on this one, Jamie, but I'm going to go next with the 1993 PGA Championship. And this is at Inverness Club in Toledo. Now, this one is maybe slightly unique in our, the whole oeuvre of Greg Norman heartbreaks, in that he comes into the final round. He is leading by 1, but he shoots a 69 in the final round. So this is not like some big collapse where he shoots a 76. Paul Azinger just goes on this insane tear, shoots a 68. They get into a playoff. And I think what makes this one tough for me is that in the playoff, they both have birdie putts on the second playoff hole. Azinger misses his birdie putt. He lips it out, taps in. Norman misses his, not a crazy long birdie putt. 4 feet left, and he misses the 4-footer. And so just in terms of singular shots where you look at and go, wow. And there's not so many of those in Norman's career, is there? Because a lot of this is these longer day-long narratives of collapsing. But this is one where it's a 4-foot putt that would have kept the playoff going, and just one of those sort of complete heartbreaks.
Yeah, I think when you think of images of heartbreaks, you think of missed putts, you think of Scott Hoken missing small little putts, or Jean Van der Velde standing in the water or whatever. But Norman tended not have those. It was someone else that took the claim. But this one's right. It's that lip out and then immediately going to find Azinger to shake his hand. So good pick.
Thank you.
Okay, my last pick. I've got about 4 or 5 options. I enjoyed going back to these maybe too much. This is, but I'm going to pick the 1984 U.S. Open, Shane. So we're going to Winged Foot, which has caused a disaster for many people. But this is maybe the first time he's really in contention for a major. I think in his debut at the 1981 Masters, he led after 18 holes. He got into the penultimate group, but he never was really in it, sort of back 9. He was always a bit further back. So in this one, he's 2 shots back heading into the final round. He's in the penultimate group again. But Hale Irwin, the leader, shoots 79. So he's out of it early. And it becomes a 2-horse race almost immediately between him and Fuzzy Zeller. So give you my fashion note here. He's wearing a light blue shirt. He's wearing these white tartan trousers with no hat. So this guy's fashion is all over the place. But again, another good era for the Norman fashion. So he's 3 back of Fuzzy with 9 to play. Every commentary moment is talking about his distance. He's using a persimmon-headed driver, but he's whaling on it. And again, talking about his finishes, the last 3 holes in regulation for Norman are just insane. He makes one of the hardest up and downs you could ever imagine on 16, from above a bunker to a downhill green. 17, he blows right, has to chip out from the side of a tree, gets up and down with an 8 iron for par. And then 18, Shane, you can picture it, the sort of same hole as Phil Mickelson comes onto. He's tied for the lead at this point. He hits the middle of the fairway. They're shouting about how long it is. He's got a 6 iron into the green. Shane, can you hazard a guess as to where this ball lands?
Oh, boy. No, I can't, Jamie. You've got me on tenterhooks. I just want to hear you tell it.
So he has a 6 iron from the middle of the fairway. Shane, this ball lands in a spectator's hand. A spectator catches this ball.
Yes.
He hits it so far right again. Going back to 86, and he hits it so far right, it goes into the grandstand. The commentator said, "Oh, wow, he's hit one of the worst shots of the day. He's hit it fat. It's going to the bleachers, for God's sake. Unbelievable."
For God's sake, like he's personally offended.
So you see Norman walking down the fairway, but the fans are cheering, and the commentators, Norman, nobody knows why, and it's because this guy in the crowd has caught the ball. He caught the ball in the bleachers. He's 40 yards from the hole, so he has to take the drop. We have the sort of Van de Velde moment. He's dropping it into deep rough. It's all over, right? He's got no chance. He hits a chip shot to the back edge of the green. Winged foot greens are incredibly difficult, but he holes a 40-foot putt, which I'm going to tell you now, this is 1984. This might be his seminal 72nd hole moment that he was dreaming of. He celebrates it. Fuzzy's still back in the fairway watching. He doesn't know if he's made birdie or par. Long story short, they go to a playoff. Shane, this is a day where we'd go back to the first tee the next day. So this is a Monday playoff. They're going to play 18 holes. And it doesn't go well for Norman at all. I think that moment on 18 might be all it went. So he was three back after 2 holes, and he loses by 8. He shoots 75, Zello shoots 67, and it's the largest loss in an 18-hole playoff in the 23 playoffs at the US Open. But I think this is one of those rare occasions where when he holds that putt on 18, having got up and down from nowhere, he maybe thinks he's done it. The other one, it's maybe in his control or somebody else does something, but it's in front of him. This one, he's maybe waiting behind the 18th green thinking he'd done enough. So I like that element to the heartbreak.
Yeah, and one thing we'll learn is that Greg Norman sleeping on a lead or sleeping on a big moment doesn't always work out the way you think it's going to work out. Yeah, great pick. And all right, for my final pick, now Jamie, I'm going to infuriate Greg. I'm going to infuriate you. This is going against the rules completely renegade. But let me justify it before I make the pick. The reason we're doing this heartbreak draft, the underlying reason, is that we are trying to emphasize the absurd amount of mini golf tragedies that Greg Norman experienced. And you and I made the joke, I think, in preparing for this, that going back to this movie we're making, if you were writing a fictional depiction of this man's life, you'd have to leave some out because it would look unbelievable. Like nobody can suffer this much. The audience just wouldn't have it. And after we made that joke, I thought back to watching, I think it was on Netflix. There was a documentary called The Shark, but it was all about, no, I think it was an ESPN 30 for 30. It was all about this, the 96 Masters. And we have a living example of what I just said, where they did leave out a lot of heartbreak. And, there's ones, Shinnecock, the U.S. Open at 95. There's a lot that they didn't get to. But one thing they omitted specifically, and what's going to be my third pick, is the 1999 Masters. Now, this goes against the rules. It's after 96. But the reason I want to pick it is that the universe, after this 96 Masters, brought him back to suffer again. This was supposed to be the death blow. 96 was the culmination of all this heartbreak, but no, they brought him back. They brought him back just to lose again. And it's not as dramatic. He gets in the final group by shooting a 71. He actually is trailing Olazabal by a stroke going into that final round. And in the last round, he shoots a 73. Olazabal shoots a 71 to win But again, there he is with a chance to win the Masters, and it's just cruel. It's the cruel postscript to this, to the point that even the 30 for 30 was like, we can't go into this.
It's too
We
much.
simply can't.
It's going to have to be a long form sort of series, maybe have multiple seasons. We're not going to get this in 2.5 hours. But.
Yeah, that would be like the Godfather 3, where they're like, why did you do that? Why? Just didn't need that.
Well, I like it. I'll permit it. There are three good picks each, and I think now, Shane, we should get there. I think we should move to April 1996 and get to the reason that we're here to break down the 1996 Masters.
But first, Jamie, I insist that we take a break. We need to gather ourselves. I don't remember exactly what happened that day, so I'm looking forward to with anticipation. And after we come back, we're going to dive into the fray. Well, Greg, old boy, not even you can fuck this up now. Jamie, that quote that you just heard may have sounded like me doing an English accent, but in fact, it's a field recording of Peter de Bruyne, the famous golf writer. And this quote was something he actually said to Greg Norman on Saturday night, 1996 at the Masters. And it has become, for obvious reasons, completely infamous. I added the old boy. That's not the original quote, but it felt like a nice little flourish that I could add there. But yeah, Saturday night, Greg Norman sitting on a lead. Even he can't blow it, says this writer. And of course, Greg Norman would have his own reactions to that. We'll get into all of that, Jamie, but I hope it sets the stage for the dramatic, climax of our story here, the 1996 Masters.
Yeah, I think what most people enjoy about that quote is kind of it takes you inside the Augusta clubhouse. I think what I enjoy about it the most is that you started in England and you finished in Southern Australia. your accent just morphed as it went on, which I might
Thank you.
I might make that my ringtone for Augusta this year. But yeah, let's get to Augusta week. Let's set some sort of pre-tournament narratives. What people were doing going in, sort of the media hype around the start of it. So. I'll start with Norman. So Norman is world number one, as we said before. He's come off a great year. He's player of the year. But he actually has missed 2 cuts coming into Augusta. He misses the cut at the Players. He misses the cut at the Arnold Palmer Invitational. And you might think, people miss cuts. Maybe he's gearing up for the Masters. But this is actually, Shane, the first time in more than 250 PGA Tour career starts, career-wise, that he's missed 2 cuts in a row.
Incredible.
So I don't know whether there's a lot written about it that he was maybe struggling with some back injuries, but what it did mean was that he was home in Florida with Butch Harmon on the range. And when he comes to Augusta, he's telling people the phrase he uses, he's flipped the switch. He's ready to start competing. So he's blowing off the narrative of missing 2 cuts. So that's where Norman is. Well,
Jamie, we already told you, we covered what the PGA Tour is like, what the majors the previous year were like. But I do think it's worth mentioning Fred Couples had won the Players' Championship. And of course, he is the beloved figure, right? He's the people's champ, and he's especially at Augusta, widely loved by the whole gallery. So this is a name that we're going to hear and we're going to have to deal with. If you're Greg Norman, you're probably looking at him like, this is my biggest competition.
I think I was looking at Fred Couples at this point because at age 12, so the following year, I won a junior golf competition in North Berwick dressed as Fred Couples. So certainly he was my champion if he wasn't the people's champion. But yeah, he was.
I want to know to what extent. Was this full Halloween cosplay or was it
no?
just
it was Max Fly visor. I even used to try and walk like him and swing like him. He's the reason I started playing golf as a kid. So I was probably pulling for him late, sort of Sunday night at the Masters. But he was certainly one of the names going in.
Jamie, one real quick aside, if you'll allow me, about Fred Couples. When I was a kid, it was a big joke in our house that my mom had a crush on Fred Couples, and she would shout his name like he was the Beatles when he came on camera. My stepfather would, grudgingly laugh or whatever. I think it was a joke, but I do think my mom was kind of into Fred Couples. All of which to say, we're talking about his aura. I do think he was the Adam Scott of his time, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking, the Adam Scott. Yeah. But okay, more favorites. So Nick Faldo, who's going to come into this a lot. You think of Nick Faldo as being a huge character, and this is late Nick Faldo. So Nick Faldo hasn't won a golf tournament in more than a year. Yeah, as you spoke about earlier, he has a very important moment in the 1995 Ryder Cup. He has the final hole with Curtis Strange that clinches it for Europe. He's the 7th best player in the world at this point, and he also misses the cut at the Players, which was his previous start. So he's at home grinding, and he actually arrives at Augusta on Saturday. So he's one of the first to arrive, and there's a good story about what happens there on Sunday, but I'll save that for a little bit.
Jamie, there is one player coming into this Masters who has won twice on the PGA Tour so far this year in 1996. Do you know who that player is?
Twice before the Masters.
Twice before the Masters. So starts on January 7th at the Mercedes in California. There's only maybe 10 or so tournaments. One guy has won twice coming in.
Give me who is Hal Sutton?
It is Phil Mickelson.
Oh, right.
Phil Mickelson. And so he's another name we're going to talk about. We are, of course, going to talk about Ernie Els. Ernie Els has not won yet this year, but he is one of the bigger figures at the time, always kind of competing for world number one. And so these are the other figures that we're going to keep an eye on here.
And one non-pro that was in the field that you might have heard of, would you recognize the name Tiger Woods, Shane?
I very much would, Jamie. I don't know if you know this, but he went on to become a really good golfer.
No spoilers. We
Sorry.
might be discussing him more in this podcast as we go on. But yeah, Tiger's a 2-time U.S. amateur champion. He's a junior at Stanford. He'd made the cut at the Masters the year before. Of course, he won the amateur, so he got in. He won the amateur again, so he gets in again. He'd made the cut the year before. He's made 11 PGA Tour starts at this point, but he's actually missed his first 7 cuts. So he's not really had his breakout moment yet on the professional scene, but there's huge talk about him before. And what I found interesting was Tiger played with Greg Norman on Monday this week. So he plays a practice round with Greg Norman, and that's really interesting because they share Butch Harmon at this point, both coached by Butch Harmon, and they've got a few overlaps. And I think there's what we'll talk about when it comes to how this event changed golf is a lot to do with the sort of handover from Norman to Faldo. So them playing on Monday is interesting. On Tuesday, he plays alongside Fred Couples and Raymond Floyd, so 2 past champions. And then on Wednesday, Tiger plays with Jack and Arnie. So this is a 20-year-old amateur just naming whoever he wants to play with at Augusta. And then Nicholas has a famous quote in his pre-tournament press conference. He said, "Arnold and I both agree that you could take his Masters and my Masters, add them together, and this kid should win more."
Incredible.
So they won 10 green jackets between them, Shane. He's not even turned pro yet, and Jack's already saying he should win more than that.
Which is really one of the worst things you can do to a young player, to set an outrageous level, completely against history. But, Jamie, I just a little quick thought on that. You talking about that, Tiger is immediate audience with all the greats of the game, practicing with all these famous people, accepted immediately. I wonder what Greg Norman thinks a year later, having all this as background. When Tiger goes in and does the thing that was the struggle of his life, right away he wins. Like, he was the golden child, right? They called him the bear cub, Greg Norman, when he was a kid, because he was going to be the next Nicklaus. He played a tournament in Australia with Nicklaus earlier, where Nicklaus said, "You've got to come to the PGA Tour." Tiger is the same thing, except he can do it under pressure. He can win the tournaments that Norman was supposed to win.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll spoil it for anyone by saying that Tiger doesn't go on to win 11 green jackets.
No.
I'm not counting him out yet. He may still a few more. But interestingly, I did research it because I'm sad, and this is why we're doing podcasts like this. He was actually the favorite to win 15 of the next 17 Masters. So maybe he should have won 11 is what I am saying. But
so this is our first big hot take is that Tiger Woods was an underachiever.
Exactly.
All right, Jamie, enough foreplay. Let us get into the tournament itself. It begins, as you said, Greg Norman may have some back issues, but he says he's flipped a switch. I think his grip is more closed. How does he do on this first day?
He does pretty well, Shane. He shoots 63.
Okay,
that sounds like a good score. But interestingly, you mentioned the bad back. So he comes in, he says he's flipped the switch, he says he's good, but he's dealing with this bad back that nobody really knows about. And actually, I find this interesting. We talked about Fred Couples. So Fred Couples has a notoriously bad back at this point.
Sure.
And he has a physio that he travels with called Tom Bores. Tom Bores actually helps Greg Norman this week. Some people report it as saying that Fred Couples suggested to Greg that he use him. Other people say that it went the other way and Greg Norman was reaching out, trying to find someone. But regardless, they're hard at work on the Tuesday, Wednesday, trying to loosen up Greg Norman's back.
And it worked. He went out, he parred the first 6 holes. So you think, oh, he's steady, he's doing okay. He played the last 12 holes in 9 under par to shoot 63. It's just the second 63 the Masters has ever seen. And actually, to this point in 1996, only 4 players in major history had shot 9 under par in a round. And he does it. And Norman's quote after the round was, when you get on that kind of roll, you just let the reins loose and let the horse run as fast as he wants to. Now, I enjoyed that because it kind of took me back to pictures of shirtless Greg Norman on the beach riding bareback, and there's a little bit of that in him. He's still confident. He's still there at this point, but an incredible opening round.
That is a funny thing to mention about Norman, is that if he's wounded from these near misses, it's not wounded enough to traumatize him from ever getting close again, right? He's back there over and over and over again.
Yeah, and some resilience. I mean, he would have known the pressure. At this point, the narrative is very clear of can he do it? Can he get over the line? And straight out of the gate, he does it. The only other point I want to mention here is he's quick after his round. We're talking a lot about Tiger, and I think we're going to talk a lot about throughout this. But Norman actually brings up Tiger in his post-round interview as well and talks about the influence of playing practice round with him, and saying that seeing how far Tiger was hitting it was making him sort of want to hit it further. Greg Norman was the long hitter in golf for a long time and then played with this new guy. And so he said to the press afterwards that playing with Tiger Woods on Monday felt probably like the way you guys would probably feel playing with me. So he's suggesting that Norman's longer than the media as far as Woods is longer than Norman. So I just find that interesting at this point that the 20-year-old amateur is dictating the world number 1 in his opening round. And it works. He shoots 63.
Incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. Now we've got, some names to mention here. Phil Mickelson shoots a 65. I think that would be a comfortable, if it, looking ahead, if it was the two of them in the final round, that would be a nice, comfortable pairing. It's possible. Nick Faldo is at 3 under, so he shoots a 69, 6 shots off the lead. No chance, absolutely no chance of doing anything. I can't resist the temptation to be like just to project ahead, knowing the result here. A cheap trick, but I'm going to keep doing it. So we go on to round 2, Jamie. This is, again, spoilers, this is the high water mark for Greg Norman, right? This is the 63 he shoots is the best it's going to be. He shoots 69 that second day, and we'll get on to the other people and what they do, but I want to kick it to you there. Am I wrong in saying that cracks are appearing here a little bit? Even 69 is a good score, but something's different, right?
Well, infamously, it's hard to back up a good round. Shane, you know that working in golf media. That's
every time I've shot 63, the next round has been incredibly poor.
The back nine's not been quite as good, So it's worth stating as we go throughout the week. The conditions get a little bit harder. This is the era where Augusta gets harder. The greens get firmer, the course gets harder, the wind was getting up a little bit more. Norman shoots 69, so he's leading, but I find it interesting looking back, Shane, if you go and watch what happens on 12 in that second round. So Norman hits a good shot, he's eyeing it up, the ball bounces and does the Fred Couples. So it's rolling back into the water, it hangs on the water, and you think there's no way it can stay there. This is the era where there's a bit more rough there, and he chips up to a couple of feet and saves par. And he says afterwards, if you get lucky, you get lucky. If you don't, you don't. The game is that way. And again, touching on those sort of lucky narratives that seem to come to his mind first in situations like that. But the thing I think is interesting about it is that he thinks he hits a good shot and it comes up short. He does save his par. He goes on to shoot 69. He holds on to the lead. But there's just a few shots in this second round. His putter is hot, but he's starting to show a tiny bit of cracks. But like we say, he's miles ahead.
Miles ahead. Nick Faldo, footnote, we don't need to worry about him, I don't think. But he shoots a 67. He's 4 shots off the lead. He's going to be prepared with Greg Norman in the third round on Saturday. But again, 4 shots off, and then 2 shots behind them, 6 shots behind Norman. We have David Frost and Phil Mickelson, who will be playing in the second to last group. Looking down the leaderboard, Vijay Singh's at 4 under, Corey Pavement and Ian Woosnam are at 3 under. You got various names, a couple Scots in there, Bob Tway's still hanging around. But it does look like at this point, all joking aside, we're down to about 4 players that really seem like they have a significant shot here. It's Norman, it's Faldo, it's David Frost, and it's Phil Mickelson. And that's, as the weekend starts, and Greg Norman is so far ahead that he, even with that 69, Again, we keep talking about it like that's a bad score. 69, 369s most years would do quite well, but or 4 of them. But we, even with that 69, he's 12 under, which is wild. If you were to double that, it would be far and away the Masters record if he could duplicate that over the weekend. So what do we think, Jamie? What are the narratives at this point? What is the media saying? Well, at this point, we have established Greg Norman's heartbreak. It is the main thing people talk about with him, in 96. How's this going? What's the tone?
It's kind of the only thing that people are talking about. I think Norman's getting fed up of it at this point. People are asking him, "Is this the time?" They ask him that before the tournament starts. All the coverage at this point is about it. To give you a sense of it, I found this interesting little part of a story. So this is on the Friday night. So bear in mind, we're halfway through the competition. Gary Clegg in the Ledge Inquirer writes this. He said, "So this is the plan, huh? This is how the golfing gods will inflict further pain on Greg Norman, their favorite whipping boy. Give him a huge lead in the Masters, the one tournament he covets the most. Get his hopes up and then set him up for the big kill. Nya! Stick the dagger in his back."
How does he spell nya?
Yeah, it's triple N and then YAA, which I really enjoy. That. All caps back in 1996. So he goes on to say, so what will it be this time? A final round 59 from Nick Faldo? Well, funnily enough, it's not too far off that.
Close enough, yeah.
A 72nd hole eagle by Scott Hoke. A scorecard error resulting in disqualification. Wait, here's another one. Norman shoots a 63 to stretch his lead to double digits, but wakes up Sunday morning with a tight back. Todd Bowers, who we met earlier, loses his Masters badge, and the Pinkerton guards at the gates won't let him in, and Norman throws his back out on the first tee and withdraws. No, it appears the golfing gods know some mercy.
I was going to say that scenario seems preferable to what actually happened.
I think it could have saved a little bit of heartbreak, but to go back to the idea of the narratives, that's being written on Friday night. Mm-hmm. So they were halfway. I know he's got the lead and he's way ahead of the field, but people are already writing that sort of preemptive. He's going to win it, and how's he going to win it? And surely this is his time. It couldn't possibly lose it from here.
Yeah, I was going to say, and what was that writer's name? One more time.
Gary Clegg.
Yeah, he certainly was more prescient than Peter De Bruyne. He could see what was coming a mile away. De Bruyne got fooled. A lot of us probably would have gotten fooled. So here we go into the weekend, and it's only going to get better for Norman on Saturday, isn't it, Jamie? It's only going to get the lead, at least, is only going to stretch out more. And yet, we talked about some cracks. There are maybe a few more cracks on Saturday.
Yeah. So again, the course is getting tough. This is a really tough day. This is probably the hardest day they have. So Norman shoots 71, and he leads the tournament by 6 at this point. So the famous 6-shot lead, he opens it up. But again on 12, there's another moment. So there's another sort of look into maybe what's going on in Norman's head. He again hits a shot. He thinks it's good. This time it splashes in the water. He doesn't save par. He gets up and down for bogey. But afterwards he says he put a good swing on it and it just got caught up. So again, he's sort of justifying all these moments to himself. And he's a little bit more erratic at this point. He's still long off the tee. He's just missing a few more greens. And again, he's being saved a little bit by his putter. But 71 under par. This isn't to say that 71 isn't a good score. 71 is an incredible score on this day. And like I said, it extends his lead to 6.
It does. And, Nick Faldo has disappointed himself. He shot a 73. He's completely out of it. Phil Mickelson has not made the move he needed to make. He is at 72. Jamie, I'm wondering if we have to worry about Tiger Woods on this Sunday.
Well, Tiger Woods isn't actually on the golf course on Saturday, Shane. That's
what a shame.
Tiger unfortunately shot a pair of 75s and has missed the cut. But I will give you one thing. What do you know what stat Tiger Woods led the Masters in, even for the 2 days he was there?
This is just out of the top of my head, but did he hit 26 of 28 fairways?
He did. That actually, funnily enough, he did, but that isn't actually the stat he led.
That wasn't. I was looking at our notes. No, I don't know. Tell me, Jamie.
Fairways are wide there, but yeah, I thought I'd hide that one from you. So he did hit 26 to 28 fairways, which you think, how does Tiger Woods miss the cut from there?
Yeah.
But actually, to educate you a little bit on what happens in the next year, and a lot of it comes down to that crossover with Norman that we'll get into a little bit later. But at this point, Tiger Woods is leading the driving distance stats. So the driving distance in this era, as it is now, is just recorded on 2 holes. I believe it's the There's a hole on each 9 that the driving distance is measured on. Tiger Woods, Shane, leads the driving distance with an average drive of 342 yards.
Goodness gracious. What's second place? Do we know?
I know that Greg Norman, I think in the final round, averages around about 290.
Okay, so we're a good 50 yards clear of our competition at this point.
Remember, this is the era where Augusta's cutting the grass with the fairway, so the direction, so the ball's running out a little bit more. But to put that in perspective, that's the longest driving distance average ever at the Masters in 1996 by an amateur. Bryson DeChambeau led the driving distance stats in 2025 with 330 yards. So it just gives you a sense of what's coming around the corner with Tiger, despite him going home at this point.
Unbelievable. So Tiger Woods has gone home, and Jamie, I want to point this out to you. This is, I think, an underrated moment. We talk about the what ifs. I don't know if this is going to count for our what if segment, but I just want to flag it, which is that Nick Faldo on this Saturday, again, his putter betrays him. He shoots a 73, but he birdies 17, and he scrambles for par on 18. Otherwise, he would not be in the final group. In the final group would be Phil Mickelson, 25-year-old Phil Mickelson, who has not yet won a major, would famously struggle in this part of his career to win majors until he figured it out and he went on to win a bunch. But Greg Norman later admitted that he would have liked to have played with Phil Mickelson. You know, Phil Mickelson was nice. They would have complemented each other's shots. It would have been a far more pleasant atmosphere. Nick Faldo is a different can of worms, right? Nick Faldo is a different thing altogether. Faldo is intense. He is not necessarily beloved of his competitors when he's at his prime like this. He is an insular guy. He is not the most friendly person. This is like that birdie he made on 17 and that scramble truthfully could have changed the course of golf history, at least in this very narrow context.
Yeah, and like I said before, it kind of sets up this unbelievable final pairing on Sunday. You know, Phil is a huge name now, but back then he was 25. He hadn't won a major yet. He hadn't had heartbreak yet. I think I looked it up, and Norman and Faldo had played 110 competitive rounds at Augusta before that Sunday. So, I mean, they are at the peak of their power. They're obviously late peak of their powers, but just such a huge final pairing. And I think you're right to point out, I like that being one of the what-if moments there. And then one of the interesting stories I find here, Shane, probably one of my favorite stories I find. This is probably in the era where agents are a bit looser and everything's going on in the 19th hole and there's some stories and bets being laid. But Frank Williams, who's Norman's agent that you touched on earlier, he actually put a bet on his player. So he put a $10,000 bet on Norman to win at 14-1. Yeah. So he's only going to make $140,000 if he's going to bet $10,000.
He bet before the tournament. I thought you were saying on Saturday evening he made a bet.
No.
Okay.
So on Saturday evening, he famously says, it's his account, that he was offered $100,000 for his bet. I'll take over your bet for $100,000, and he turns it down.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's kind of, again, speaks to the narrative of what's going on here. But I just find I enjoy the fact that the agent of the world number one golfer and the leader by 6 is just considering selling betting stubs in the 19th hole at Augusta. But
I think, imagine if he had sold it and Greg Norman finding out. His agent didn't believe that he could hold a 6-shot lead. You can't. If you're he did the right thing. At that point, you cannot hedge your bet or sell out.
It'd be a great twist in the movie. It'd be a great twist.
It sure would. So, okay, Jamie, you let us know about the the man who said this is still going to end in heartbreak. Now we're a day later. Now Norman's got a 6-shot lead. What are people saying at this point? I mean, this is like, all but a sure thing, it seems like.
Yeah, very much so. Peter De Bruyne is going to come in shortly at the bar, but one of the local newspapers.
Let me know if you want me to do that quote again. I'm quite
happy. You practice it. I'll cover you for a few minutes here. One of the local newspapers that I found, again, it's kind of indicative of everything that's being written. It writes, if he doesn't get it here after a record-tying 63 in the first round, after taking a 6-shot lead into the final round, then Norman will carry an even heavier burden of being known as the guy who came up short in the majors. So it's simple. That was the final line of the local newspaper. But it's essentially just, there's so much of the narrative around, surely this is his time. But it also, because of his heartbreak in the past, it sort of touches on this fact. nobody wants to say it out loud, but what if he doesn't?
Yeah.
What would the impact be? How's it going to happen? In almost everything you read, there's just that sort of undertone of that sentiment.
And rightly so. Again, history is on the side of everybody who has a little bit of anxiety about what's going to happen. Now we have a Peter Kostis incident too that I remember hearing about, and I wrote about it at some point in covering this. But I think this was, the Peter De Bruyne thing. Well, you can't fuck it up now, old boy. That is like, that's funny and it's kind of pithy. But the Kostis story, I think, is more instructive in some way. So why don't you tell us, Jamie, what exactly happened with Peter Kostis? It's a little bit a little complicated, but super interesting.
Yeah. So Peter Kostis at this time, he's a famous swimming instructor. He worked with Steve Elkington, Bernard Langer at this time. He's a CBS analyst, and he had noticed that earlier in the week, Greg Norman had gone to a strong grip, essentially. So your hand's a little bit more under, you can sort of turn the ball a bit more, you get a little bit more power. He noticed that every day it was getting a tiny bit weaker and weaker. This is the guy who's walking on the range. He's covering the event live, and he's sort of noticing this, and he had a quote saying, "Were it not for some phenomenal short game, he could have shot 78 or 80, but as it was, he left the golf course with a 6-shot lead." So bear in mind, Norman shoots 71. Kostis is saying he could have shot 78 or 80 based on how he's playing. But one of the amazing sliding doors moment, and actually this is my what if moment, is that Kostis comes up to a Golf Channel reporters walking past Kostis late on Saturday night, and they're just sort of making light conversation. You've been in these situations before as well. Everyone's talking about the event. You're just walking, you're sort of leaving sight. But Kostis says to the reporter that he's noticed his script change, and he's sort of worried about what's going to happen the next day. Augusta at that era was a lot about angles. You had to be in control. You had to take sides of the golf course out, and he worried that he wasn't going to be able to do that. Kostis, crucially at this point, thinks that this conversation's off the record, but the reporter goes straight to the truck and sort of reports this to the team that's doing the sort of live from back in those days, the sort of after show and preview show that's going to get put out the next day. And so on Sunday morning, there's a preview show to Augusta, and they're talking about Saturday's round. And this is then repeated on air. So they're talking about the grip change and talking about concerns. They're not talking about the 6-shot lead at this point. They're talking about concerns they have. And Shane, can I get you to maybe hazard a guess at who's watching from a house in Augusta on Sunday morning?
It has to be Greg Norman himself.
So it was indeed. So Greg Norman is somehow sitting at home in his rental home. He's probably gone for a run, maybe a horseback ride. And he's...
shirtless, of course.
He's watching this, and not only watching it, but he's so upset by the comments, he calls Frank Chirkanian. So he's a famous producer of the Golf Channel back in these days. Greg Norman knew him. He calls him to sort of chew him out and say how bad this is. Chirkanian passes this on to Kostis, and Kostis is sort of shaking his head, saying if that's what he's doing on Sunday morning, then he's cooked.
And Jamie, I think that is like the biggest thing of this story is why are you thinking about this stuff? Why are you fixating on it? It's the same with the De Bruyne story. Norman later saying it really bothered me. It really got in my head. Champions don't let that happen, right? I mean, we're going to be harsh on Greg Norman here, but in my mind, it shows a certain weakness of competitive spirit that these distractions are swirling in. It also sounds like Kostis was dead on, and Greg Norman, somewhere in his heart, knows that Kostis was dead on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that in it. The thing I find amazing is that Norman at this point is getting a little bit tetchy, not this week, but in this era of the questions of if he's ever going to win another major and is he going to win at the Masters. So you'd think you're not going to buy newspapers, you're not going to read the newspapers, you're not going to seek it out. But yet he's sort of pacing at his rental house, and he's like, sees the remote, and he's like, oh, I know it's on, and switches it on, and then it leads to this. So that's my what if moment from this whole thing, is just what if he didn't watch it? What if he was just took his mind off it doing something else? It's just, I kind of think that, to your point, that sort of solidified in his head what he was maybe worried about.
Yeah, and seeking, like you said, seeking that out is, people today, it's like a difference in era a little bit, Jamie. People in today wouldn't do that. Right, the golfers that work with mental coaches and things like that, they would know to avoid that. This is something where, like, yeah, Greg, why are you watching the Golf Channel to listen to yourself? So let's get on to Sunday. I mean, this is it, Jamie. This is sort of and whenever I think about this story, it's almost like an anticlimax on Sunday because we know so well what happened. But one little thing I want to bring up, and there's not much we can say about it really, but there's some kind of personal issue, isn't there? There's some kind of personal issue happening with Greg Norman. And Sam Wyman, in the book we mentioned earlier, he alludes to it. There's something on Sunday morning. We don't know if it involves his family. You don't know what it involves. And he's never come clean on it, right? They've asked him about it before, but there's something else apparently going on. I don't know what to think. I don't know if this is like throwing another excuse at the dartboard or if it was something really serious, and we'll never know. But I do want to at least point it out just because it is sort of this narrative that has emerged in the years since about what's going on in Greg Norman's head. Now, Butch Harmon, Greg Norman, they are here. Harmon tells CBS in the morning that Norman is, quote, at peace, but in reality, this is not what he found on the range. And Sam Wyman covers this really well in his book. But Greg Norman has this quote where he says, I could feel it. My swing wasn't there. And I said to Butch, I was off. And Butch said, no, everything looks great. And I said, no, Butch, it's not great. I can feel it. All right. But again, the negativity, right? It's just incredible. You have a 6-shot lead at the Masters. Like, you think, like, if they're at their point, you can just fake it for 18 holes, right? No matter how bad you're feeling, just hold on to it, shoot a 70, 72, whatever. So now Butch Harmon follows up with this quote I really like, Jamie. He says, I've always said one night he and I were going to get drunk somewhere, and I was going to say, okay, what the fuck happened Sunday? He's never told his caddy and I what it was, but we knew something was wrong. And this is alluding to the personal issue because we were both standing there saying, who is this guy? This is not the guy who left last night. So contrast that with Peter Costas, who said it kind of was the guy who left last night. He got a little bit lucky. But anyway, Norman comes back with, I should have turned to them both and just purged. It would have taken 10 minutes and it would have been over with, but I didn't do it. So the lesson there is don't harbor things internally. Don't push the elephant under the rug, which we still don't know what that elephant is. Anxiety and happiness both come from within. And so you have to ask, which one do you prefer? From a lifetime, Jamie, I would say happiness every time over anxiety.
Yeah, certainly if you're leading the Masters by 6 and you're on the range trying to warm up and talking to your coach. But yeah, I mean, interesting perspective from Norman afterwards. And whether this is all confirmation bias as to what's going to happen next.
That's exactly what I thought. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jamie, but it also made me think quickly of this is, we should say, a common experience if you're leading the Masters. I love the story, and I think of it all the time with Scotty Scheffler, the first Masters he won, is literally in tears with his wife before the round, going, I don't know if I can do this. This is the weight of this on me, of the thing I've dreamed about is so incredible. How do I go out and golf today? So again, the anxiety is normal. I think his reaction to it is what's abnormal.
Should we head to the first tee, Shane?
I'm scared, but yes. Yes, we should.
So we've seen the writing on the wall, but as we spoke about, two titans of the game, all this experience, two best players of their generation walking to the first tee. Shane, I actually have a cool story about the first tee. So Nick Faldo arrived on the first tee second. And do you have any idea why that might be interesting? Have you ever heard the Tiger Woods story here?
No, because I've heard about, it's like a power move to come second, but
Sure.
I don't know what you're referring to now.
So Paul Azinger told the story, and I think it plays in here as to why Norman maybe shouldn't have arrived on the first tee first. But Azinger was paired with Tiger on the weekend in a Masters in, I think, early 2000s. And somebody's advice to Paul Azinger was make sure that you don't arrive on the tee second. Don't make sure you don't arrive on the tee first, because if Tiger arrives after you, he gets a huge ovation. You're waiting for him. You feel like you're sort of maybe not the alpha in the situation. So he was on the putting green. Tiger's on the putting green. He sees Tiger leave and he thinks, great, I've got him here. I'm just going to hit a couple more putts. I'm going to cut it really fine. I'm going to walk to the first tee. So he walks that first tee. As you know, you've been there at sort of 50 yards. You walk through the crowd to get to the first tee. He gets to the first tee. There's no Tiger Woods. And he's looking around and he's like, where the hell did he go? Tiger then walks onto the first tee, gets this huge ovation that goes on forever. And everyone's high-fiving, hooper and hollering, and Tiger shakes his hand, and Zinger said, he's like, I was done for. And the whole point was that Tiger had snuck to the toilet. He'd make a beeline for the toilet and then gone to the first tee. Some mind games going on. Anyway.
Incredible.
A short interjection there. But yeah, so Norman arrives on the tee first, Faldo arrives second. Huge ovation for both. And as you'll see throughout, both players sort of share the cheer, and maybe even Norman could have been the favorite at Augusta this year.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I think there's a natural inclination for us when enough pain has happened, then we want the story of the climax, the reverse of whatever comeuppances. We want to see the person get their due after that long time. As we keep talking about, there's only so much pain we can stomach before it starts to feel gratuitous.
Yeah, and I think maybe history forgets to a degree that Norman was likable to fans at this point. He was big and charismatic and outgoing, and Faldo maybe wasn't. And those personas have maybe flipped in the history since somewhat. But yeah, certainly the cheers are for Norman. And so they head off on the first tee. Worth pointing out here, Norman is actually going to drive the ball pretty well all day, Shane, but he hits 12 fairways in the final round, which I think if you'd given him that at the start of the day, he takes it. But he misses he misses his first drive left. His caddy had spoken about the fact that they never like to see the ball go left. Immediately it went left. He made a bogey, missed a short putt on the first. But one of my favorite parts of this whole thing is this is a huge day, a huge occasion, a huge round. And the final round broadcast cuts in when the leaders are on the 7th fairway.
And I think that's like something that if we have younger listeners here, they really don't understand what it used to be like at Augusta. And I think, Jamie, even the 7th hole was a compromise, right? I think for the longest time, it was like, we're only going to show the back 9 of the leaders on Sunday. And so even to come at 7 and 96 was, wow, that's pretty good. It's pretty good to get them that early. But it is remarkable, isn't it? Here, it's unthinkable now not to have on a Thursday at the PGA like some coverage of some kind. And here you have the most famous round maybe in the entire 1990s in a major, and we're missing a third of it.
Well, as many people will say, the Masters doesn't begin until the back 9 on Sunday, but maybe that was the original origin of that saying was the broadcast. Somebody said the broadcast, and they went with the actual tournament doesn't start.
And so what do they do? You rewatch this, Jamie. What do they do when they come in? When they come in and it's like, oh, by the way, is it just a highlight package to catch you up? Like, how does it work?
It gets even better. So they open the broadcast. The broadcast opens with Jack Nicklaus. Why, you might ask? This is 10 years on from 1986. And so they always have these montage packages. But the funny part is, bear in mind, Greg Norman is 6 shots clear starting this day. And the first highlight they show is one of his biggest losses. And Jim Nantz actually makes a comment about how Norman's glory was Norman's heartbreak in 1986. And this is setting the scene for it. So they open with that montage package. They do quick recap of how the first few holes have gone, and we'll get to that. But then the first ad break they go to, they have these things called Masters Memories, where they just go back and show you a sort of 30-second clip. The 30-second clip that they chose for the very first advert break is Larry Mize chipping in 1987. So the script writers are hard at work here initially in the broadcast.
I mean, between the De Bruyne quote, between the other things, it's like, I actually think Norman was jinxed left and right more than any other athlete has ever been jinxed. And the column you read where it was just like relentlessly like, this guy's going to find a way to fail. Maybe it wasn't Norman's fault. I think enough jinxes happened that the universe was completely against him.
Indeed. But let's recap a few holes. So Norman bogeys the first. He actually makes a really good birdie on 2. He's got really delicate touch from missing the green big, which is obviously not a great spot to be. Birdie's 2, but so does Faldo. So Faldo's made up 1. Faldo says that his tee shot on the 6th, you can think of that pin position on 6 as that high right-hand corner. Faldo gets it on top, hits what he considers the best shot of his week up there. But we'll get to what many people consider his best shot on 13 later. But he makes that putt to be down by 4 when the broadcast opens up on 7. So by the time the broadcast starts, we're all settling in at home. Norman's lead's already down. He's already lost 2 of his 6 shots, so we go to 7. And I think it's evident. One of the notes I made, and Vern makes mention of it, and I don't think anybody now could go back and watch this and not feel the sense of it, is that Norman's taking a long time. This is something that Norman was a little bit known for, but I think on this Sunday is like a case study for how not to go about pre-shot routines. I have it clocked at sort of 35 seconds. Vern, I think, describes him as rather deliberate in that sort of Vern Lindquist way, just before he hits a big shot on 8 into the trees. But it's clear that maybe the battle on Sunday is going on in Norman's head more than it's going on the greens or on the fairways. And you can just sense that there's some turmoil there.
And there's an even bigger element there with that. It's not just Vern Lundquist noticing it, but obviously Nick Faldo is noticing it too. And Nick Faldo, they call him like the thief of Augusta. A lot of his green jackets came from behind, and he's very good at this, and he's very competitive, and he is highly attuned to when people are feeling the pressure. And it's obvious to him, and he talked about it later. It's very obvious something is going on with Greg Norman. And, we'll get here in the end. He's very classy, Nick Faldo, when it's all over. But you have to imagine him here. I mean, Greg Norman's nickname is the Shark, but you have to imagine Faldo as the Shark, and he is just chumming. Like there is blood in the water right now. And as you mentioned, by the time we get to the 9th hole, very quickly after the broadcast, it's down to 3 at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think 9 for a lot of people is maybe the most crucial part. I think Norman in the documentary, you cited the ESPN documentary, says that was a turning point. Again, one of the cool parts of it, Ben Crenshaw had won the year before, but had missed the cut. So he's in the booth now with Nance. He's in Butler Cabin adding some analysis. And Norman's taking ages he's hit a perfect drive down 9. He's right down at the bottom. He's only got a flick with the wedge. And the commentators are saying, he can't miss this short. And Crenshaw comes in and doubles down saying he has to go long here.
Again they got to stop jinxing this guy.
It's almost like too much on the nose. Of course, the shot comes up and it spins back down. And to me, honestly, we talked earlier about where we were in 1996. This is the shot that I remember more than all the other shots combined. For some reason, the image of it rolling back down the hill and taking a while to come all the way back down, I don't know why it's stuck in my head. But Norman doesn't get that up and down. Faldo makes a good putt. And Faldo had said... He says afterwards, he really wanted to get it. He wanted to half the lead by the time they went to the back 9. And now it was down to 2. And I actually think this is, to Norman's point about this being pivotal, he can walk to the back 9 having, made a par on 9, maybe made a good up and down, or maybe played it safe and went long. And you're walking to the back 9 with a 3-shot lead, which you can't really lose on one hole. You have 2-shot swings quite a lot.
That's right.
It goes badly. He's just lost a shot on each of the last 2 holes, and now he's got that long walk to 10, and he's only ahead by 2. Yeah,
it is completely tragic, and it's Sam Weinman described it as swift and painstaking. The swift part is the only thing I would take issue with, because this is going to continue through the back 9. It's all happening in slow motion. It's like that phrase where you're talking about. It happened slowly and then all at once. And I think maybe this next part is the all at once part, but because it's golf and because we do have Norman, agonizing for 30 seconds over every shot, it's never really fast, is it? It is something that you have to endure. And then when it's over, and when I say it's over, I'm looking at like number 12. We'll get there. When it's over, you still have 2 more hours to sit through this, right? This is the slowest moving car crash, and I think somebody described it that way. That is a fundamental part of this experience that I think we would both recommend everybody go back and watch this just for the visceral sensation of how uncomfortable it is. That's a great advertisement for it. If you want to be very uncomfortable, go back and watch the YouTube.
Strap in.
Yeah, strap in for some just real awful viewing. No, but it's that kind of thing where you're afraid of the nightmare. Everybody's jinxing the nightmare, and then you're seeing the nightmare, and just the awful slow motion of it. Just like even 30 years later watching, it's just excruciating.
And I think people, when they have a big lead, they always talk about they want to see the change in momentum happen in their favor. So the first hole that changes is them making a birdie to, even if they end up losing a little bit, they just want to feel like it goes in the right direction. And this is, like you said, it's just a slow bleed the wrong way. But to the point I brought up earlier, he drives it really well all day. Norman's the best driver of his generation. He goes to 10. He hits a perfect drive down 10. He's in the middle of the fairway. Like we said earlier, one of our heartbreak drafts, he pulls it left on 10, hits a terrible chip. He makes another bogey. So he's just made 3 5s in a row. The lead was 2 at the turn. He's now up 1, and they go down 11. And 11 is another one of these just... I think when you look back at this, Norman has every possibility of doing the wrong thing here. The first hole, he pulls it left. Then he's got another hole where he have to go long and he goes short. Then he's in the middle of the fairway and he pulls it way left. 11's a great example. He hits a really good shot in. He's 15 feet above the hole. Faldo's putted and missed. And you've got that huge crowd there, but that's that kind of quiet area of the course.
Right.
And he races this by like 4 feet and then he misses it coming back. And I'm going to tell you now that this is probably my favorite part of the broadcast, Shane. I went back with a stopwatch. And from the moment that they get to that green, the camera doesn't cut from the two of them for 7.5 minutes.
Wow.
So from all of Faldo's putts to all of Norman's 3-putt and the entire walk up to the 12th tee, which everyone knows is kind of this like famous, obviously Amen Corner, but this famous little area. But I just love that the broadcast, at this point, there's nobody else really in the tournament anyway, so they've got no reason to cut. They don't even say very much. But to your point about going back to watch, this is like pure cinema, just walking with them to the 12th after what's just happened.
And you wouldn't see that today, I would argue. Even if you had a similar situation where it's only two guys, the producer at some point would say, we can't stand these guys. But that's beautiful. I mean, watching it again, it is a beautiful moment. And you are seeing such a dramatic thing play out just on the faces of these guys. And they don't talk a lot. And that's another cool thing about it. I think that would be lost today. And Jamie, I also want to point out there's a kind of dark comedy that as you are blowing this lead, as you are living up to everybody's worst impression of yourself, the very next thing you come to is number 12 at Augusta.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like your wife divorcing you, your kids leaving you, you lose your job, and then just as you're sitting there, someone comes to the door and goes, and by the way, you're being audited. The IRS is being audited. It's just like an extra thing. You're like, oh no. And number 12, it's just been I think it's always been the best theater in major championship golf. A lot of times the most tragic theater, and here again, it lives up to everything we know about it.
Yeah, we talked earlier, and I think I mentioned maybe giving a hint as to what is going to happen. That Norman had sort of shown these cracks. He'd hit 2 good shots on 12. One had gone in the water, one had stayed up. And one of the cool things about the broadcast, again, they have the mics that pick up the sound are so close. They're basically the tee markers. Norman tees it up right next to it. And it makes such a thud noise that you think he's hit it really well. And this, I don't know what category this falls into. I'll find one later when we discuss them. This is my favorite moment of the broadcast because Norman hits his shot. He looks slightly worried, but it's online. He's not leading. They think it's a good sound. The commentators say, then you just hear somebody in the crowd, just this old man that's picked up on this mic says, it's in the water. And this is quite literally seconds before one bounce splash. And I just love that this guy who's sat there all day, he knows the wind at Amen Corner better than anyone, and he's the only person you pick up on the microphone. It's great.
But it's a little bit of a change for Norman. If it was like the jinx that we've seen everywhere else, it would be someone going, oh, that's perfect. That's right on.
Yeah, exactly.
All over it.
Leading up to it.
Yeah, it's I would love if we could find that old man. If we could go back, he's probably not alive anymore, but what a great moment.
Yeah, we got to find him. And Shane, I got one anecdote here for you that I think you'll like. But at this point, Norman's head is in the dishwasher. He's just hit it in the water. Faldo's that cool moment where somebody gets to walk over the bridge and the other person isn't granted access because they still have to drop their ball. So he drops his ball near Spieth's and then hits it up and he makes his double bogey, and the lead is well and truly gone by this point. Faldo's just gone too clear. So Norman's dealing with a lot of nerves here, and I watched this whole broadcast like the Zapruder film. Like I watched frame by frame for this because Norman says in multiple interviews, I've seen interviews with Dan Patrick and an Australian TV interview as well. I don't know if you've ever heard, do you know what his tactic is for dealing with nerves when he's walking on the course?
I feel like I saw this in the 30 for 30, but it's not coming to me, so I'm excited to hear.
So Norman claims that when he was feeling nerves on the course, he would take his thumb, shove it under his rib cage as hard as he could until he felt intense pain.
Okay.
The idea being that the pain would take away from the thought of the nerves and just center him again. So I actually looked this up, and apparently it's a real thing. Not necessarily with Norman. Who knows? He claims he was doing it. I didn't see it at all during the final round, but it's called effect regulation. So it's just a way of sort of confusing your brain into it. Apparently, Princess Diana used to use it a little bit when she was dealing with the stress and anxiety that the press caused her. But Norman claims that he would just shove his thumb up his rib cage, and I have a feeling that if he was doing it on this round, when he's walking over the bridge there in 12, he's probably got multiple thumbs up, multiple rib cages at this point.
Well, I gotta say, Jamie, when you talked about shoving a thumb somewhere, I was very worried about where it was going.
Feeling for his caddy.
Yeah, that's why Bruce Edwards quit. And the other thing I thought was, well, if you're a golf player out there who's struggling with nerves, now you know what solution not to do based on Norman's success.
I think
that is funny. So, what did you see? I mean, was there any? You didn't see any thumb shoving?
No. Do you know what? You actually watch Norman's demeanor. He's such an alpha kind of guy. You know, he's got the hat and he's the shirt and he's tall and he still has his shoulders back. To the same point, this is about the time Rory in 2011 loses the lead, isn't it? He three putts 12 from nowhere, and he's just gone through 10, 11. And sort of the lasting image of Rory from that collapse is his body language, right? He was slumped over his driver on 10 and walking off the green on 12, and he was younger. But there's nothing in that with Norman. Norman's kind of still putting a brave face on. And even when they get to 13, so to skip ahead to 13, just such a great hole. Again, there's another good 8 minutes of clip where they just don't cut away. Faldo hits it in the fairway. Norman hits it up into the trees. And I think Norman's got 235 yards to the hole from the trees. He's got 215 to the front. And he spends what feels like 25 minutes, but it's like 2 minutes of the broadcast. And he says to his caddy, and you can hear it on the mic, which is cool. He says, "Do you think I can get a 2-iron there?"
Yeah.
And so he's still thinking about, he's still playing aggressive. He still wants to go for it. And I kind of wonder what would have happened if he did. But Navarro, his caddy, will say afterwards that for a guy that's just hit 5 of the first 12 greens, I gave him a quick no and talked him out of it. So Norman lays up from there. And then we cut to Faldo, who's in the middle of the fairway.
You know, and what's interesting about this, there are two contradictory things here. First of all, you know, Nick Faldo has a really good round. You're looking at that last leaderboard. I don't know if he had the best round of the day, but he had the best round of anybody in the top 10.
He actually had the best he had the best round of the weekend on the Sunday.
The whole weekend. Yeah. So he's playing incredibly, but it's also the case that this stretch from 9 through 12, all he's doing is making pars. And he's going from 3 down to 2 up, which is wild. Right.
Yeah,
this is, so we tell the story. Yeah, Nick Faldo did a great job, and he's, the last person you want to see if you're Greg Norman. However, this is still, not like people didn't know, but we do have to emphasize in this one stretch. And I think, Jamie, you would agree by 12, it's over, right? This is the moment. If not earlier, we can say it by 12, it's definitively done. In that stretch, all Faldo's doing is making pars.
Yeah, which is a very Faldo way of doing it, isn't it? The guy famously won the major by making 18 pars in the final round, is just parring his way to the lead here on Sunday. But Shane, I'm just going to take you to 13 fairway, and then we'll move ahead to how this all wraps up. But this is probably the most famous shot, I think, of Nick Faldo's career. So he's just taken the lead for the first time all week. He's got, I think, 215 yards to the hole. He spends a lot of time with his caddy, Fanny Sunison, in the fairway deciding what to do. He pulls his 5-wood out. He's clearly going for it. He steps away. He goes back in. The commentators are commenting on the fact that he's just stepped off. He then steps off again. The crowd react to it. He goes back to his bag and takes a 2-iron. And the amazing part here is that the commentators, because he pulls iron, thinks that he's laying up. So they see the iron come out. He's quite quick into the ball. And I love the fact that when he swings and hits his 2-iron, the commentator shouts, "That doesn't look like a layup swing."
Yes.
And before the ball even hits the green, the commentator is saying it's in the middle of the green. And it's this amazing shot off the side hill lie, 2-iron back in the day. The distances these guys hit it. He hits it into the middle of the green. Having just gone 2 up, Norman's just laid up. He's just put it in the middle of the green with one of the best swings and shots of his career. And so I find this video, Shane, I think you're gonna like this. You're not gonna know where it's going. This is, I don't know how big a fan you are of the Powder Puff Girls. Are you aware of them?
Oh, you're a huge fan.
I thought you were.
I'm aware of them. I think I was too old for them, and then my kids were too young for them. So I don't think I've seen an episode.
Well, if you had a bingo card with when Powder Puff Girls was going to come up on the 1996 Masters pod, you can scratch it off now. But
nice.
Faldo said that on the Sunday of Masters Week, He'd gone to the 10th tee for a practice round. He skied his tee shot off the 10th tee, and his timing was so off that him, David Ledbetter, and Fannie just walked off the course. He hit one shot. They went back to the range. Basically, his transition had got too fast. And so he says in this interview afterwards that his daughter at the time was a big fan of Powder Puff Girls. And so his swing thought for the whole week of winning the Masters was to puff it, to powder, like think of Powder Puff Girls, just puff at the ball, swing it really easy, and that's where you're going to find the sort of slot in your swing. He tells a good story about the fact that he's working on this all week, and then the very first round he gets paired with John Daly. So he goes off and he's trying to swing slow, and he's watching John Daly rip it as hard as he can. This is sort of peak Daly. Anyway, he credits that swing thought with this shot on 13 that is considered sort of the best shot of his career. And I thought this was really interesting. I think, the insight into people's swing thoughts and how they operate and under the biggest pressure is amazing. So I went back, Shane, and I looked. I don't know much about the Powder Puff Girls, so I went back to look and see kind of how big a deal it was then. Shane, would it be surprising to you that the Powder Puff Girls didn't release until 1998?
Let's go. Yes. That is amazing. Are you sure it wasn't in the UK earlier? I mean, because this is too. I want to dot our I's and cross our T's here.
There had been some pilots that had been created, but the first series releases in 1998. So in November of 1998.
So there's no chance the story is at all correct.
So there's very little, which is back to that idea of this is the era we're in, right? Guys just say stuff. The Seve Norman era. It's just these are just storytellers, entertainers. They're not necessarily golfers, and don't fact check them. Don't worry about it.
Wait, hold on a second though. Hold on, Jamie. There were some early pilots in '96, in '95 and '96. This
is April '96, and
Powerpuff Girls are produced the series pilot for their What a Cartoon series. I know these are like little one-offs. You're right. I was trying to defend Nick Faldo. I think you're right. I don't think there's any way that his daughter was watching this at the time.
No. But don't let it get in the way of what's a good story. And it was a great shot. So,
yeah.
But yeah, as we move on, like you said, I think certainly the momentum shift has happened, and at this point it's sort of a slow bleed. There is a moment on 15 where Norman is still, I think he's maybe 3 down, and he thinks if he can chip in for eagle, he wipes his second shot. And actually, this picture that I have in my office all year round, don't worry about that, but where the quite literal collapse happens and Norman falls to his knees, having missed the chance to make eagle and maybe make up 2 shots. And then it's moments later that he hits probably the worst shot of his entire week and hits it into the middle of the pond on 16, and it's all she wrote.
Yeah, Rick Riley later compared that to, I don't know if you've seen, Jamie, the famous photograph of Y.A. Tittle, the New York Giants quarterback. It's at the end of a game, and he's on the ground, leaning back, almost in that same pose, but with blood running down his head. It's after this brutal football game. And it is, it's this iconic pose. And it's funny because if you asked me for one visual, if there was one video, it would be what you mentioned on 9, coming up short, watching that ball come down. But if there's one still visual, that's the one I think of, is Norman with the black hat kind of going back like that. And there's something funny about it in that, you can talk about alternative history and everything, but it really doesn't seem like it would have made a difference. Faldo would still have had a 1-shot lead going into that last hole, going to the last 3 holes. But when we get into our what if scenarios, maybe that's one for consideration. But it just feels like at that point, what happened on 16 was always going to happen on 16.
Yeah, I mean the shot on 16, I can't tell you how far left that is. If you had like the shot link data of every shot hit at the Masters, his would be the outlier that's kind of near enough, probably nearer the crowd than it was to the green. And it's kind of when he loses his whole demeanor. He walks off quickly. He has to drop, and then it's kind of a coronation from then. I think they both par 17. Faldo actually birdies 18, which is kind of cool, just to like put the exclamation on his 67, and then you have that amazing moment with. So just to put in context as to what's happened here, Norman had a 6-shot lead to start the day, and he loses to Faldo by 5.
Yeah. I mean, if Nick Faldo had shot even par, if things had gone the same, they would have been in a playoff.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning here, probably the second sort of iconic image is the sort of embrace that they have afterwards. to be all that's made of Norman, and we're going to talk a little bit about how much credit he got for how he handled this. If you watch in the broadcast, he stands at the side. He doesn't come on to take Faldo's moment. It's kind of Faldo that holds his birdie putt and then looks for Norman immediately. He doesn't even get his ball out the hole. He looks for Norman and then sort of pulls him in for this hug. And Norman sort of famously says later that he said, "Don't let the bastards get you down," talking about the media. But it's kind of that iconic moment of sportsmanship. And I think Ken Venturi is the one on the broadcast, and he says, "I tell you what, if you look up class in the dictionary, you'll see a picture of Greg Norman." They're the words that sort of accompany this moment on the 18th green.
I would love to get inside Nick Faldo's head in that moment, because Faldo wasn't the most popular player, right, among his peers. At some periods he was actively disliked, and then, as he becomes an announcer and ages, there's sort of an image rehabilitation and all that. But he does react perfectly here. My question, I think, is, would it have been impossible not to react perfectly, right? You'd have to be a pretty big rube to kind of miss the moment. What do you think he really felt? And this is just guessing, but, you just want another Masters, right? I mean, there's got to be a sense of triumph, but he did the right thing every step of the way. And in a way, that's got to be hard, right? Not to be able to sort of outwardly celebrate your own achievement, because it comes at the expense of this, insanely heartbreaking kind of collapse by the other guy. But yeah, I would just love to know, and Faldo has continued saying the right things as the years have gone on. I would just love to be inside his brain to, what is he really thinking while this is all happening?
Yeah, I think Faldo is certainly aware of what the overlying storyline of the day is, right? And he's turning to find it. So he's just shot on him. And it is, like you said, it's an amazing round. Shoot 67, the best sort of round of the whole weekend. But he's sort of looking around. And I think Faldo's kind of awkward in these moments sometimes. And I think he doesn't know what to do in a handshake that maybe didn't feel right. And so they have a hug. It's a nice image. And one of the other parts I'd forgotten is that the scoring tent used to be just off the 18th green. They didn't have to do this. That you think of the huge Rory gif that is him crying as he won in 25. They don't have that moment. It's almost like a concussion tent off the 18th green, and so Norman can kind of exit stage left quite quickly afterwards, and then it cuts away to a whole bunch of other things. But Norman does go on to do an interview. Very quickly after, actually, I think even before the Butler Cabin sort of moment that they have with Nance and the chairman of Augusta National. And Norman says it easily. He says he screwed up. It was on him and he lost, but he'll still be waking up tomorrow. I think he says, "I'll still be breathing tomorrow, I hope." So he's sort of tongue-in-cheek about it. But interestingly, I heard Adam Scott talk about, I think Adam Scott was sort of in his early teens at this point, and he remembered Norman standing up to the media and doing the media afterwards and doing it with class. And he remembered it when, I think it was in 2012 at the Open, he bogeyed the last 4 holes. You might remember when Ernie won the Claret Jug.
Yeah, of course.
Adam bogeyed the last 4 holes, and he thought of it in that moment to then stand up in front of the media and do it. So I quite like the fact that there's a bit of a paying it forward message there in terms of standing up and dealing with the media.
Jamie, here's a question for you. Do you remember your experience watching it? I vaguely remember mine, the sense of discomfort. And the reason I asked is because in his book, Sam Weinman mentions that by the 16th hole, he and his friends were watching and they just had to leave. They didn't even watch the end. And I bet there was a lot of that going on throughout the country, throughout the world, people saying this is too much. I can't watch this anymore.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because I actually can't picture. I don't really picture even the shot on 16. I can picture 15, but maybe because I've seen it so many times. So I wonder if it was because it was on so late and I was young. I probably called it. I probably did the Weinman and called it early and Dad said over and then watch it the next day to sort of wake up to it. But yeah, you're right. It did feel over early, but still somehow a slow bleed throughout.
Yeah. Well, so don't let the bastards get you down. Nick Faldo wins the green jacket. Norman loses. They're both very classy after. What's the postscript? What's the immediate postscript here, Jamie? What do we take away from this? What do we learn?
I think it's funny because this is a coronation of Faldo. I think it's worth giving him a bit of credit here. he's got this incredible Masters record. The 3 times he's in the hunt, he wins. He never finishes in the top 10 again in any other Masters. So every single time he's in the top 10 of the Masters, he wins. And to your point about maybe sensing the other person failing. So he wins 6, that's his 6th major. He'll go on to miss the cut the next 3 Masters actually. And he only has 4 more major top 10s. He doesn't win another major after this. Similar to Norman. Norman doesn't win a major after this. He has 5 more top 10s. So this is very much the end of that era. And I think the 2 narratives that have lived on, one is Norman's collapse is the epitome of collapse, the epitome of the Sunday disaster, but also that this was the official end of the era that we spoke about earlier. These 2 big titans, but also the younger game coming through. We've just seen Tiger earlier in the week and the influence that he had. But I think I said to you before, the idea that you burn the crops before you grow them back up again. This was This was a big showdown. They had a huge fireworks party. Everything got burnt to the ground, and then they started planting their Tiger Woods seeds and wait till next year.
Yeah, and it is remarkable for these 2 Masters, like I said earlier, to happen back to back, because in some ways Norman and Tiger are so similar, but this is the epitome of how they are so different. What happens in 96 and then in 97. So truly the end of an era. Jamie, I wanted to ask you, and I thought maybe we could go back and forth here, go back to our draft. This major quite obviously is remembered for who didn't win. And there are a certain number of those throughout history, but I thought maybe we could kind of create our Mount Rushmore here. And you know what, because Greg was so unfair before, I'm going to show that this is how a gentleman does it. I'm going to give you first pick again. Who's your Mount Rushmore? So yeah, you get number 1 pick. The Mount Rushmore of majors remembered for someone who didn't win.
Okay. I think it's obvious. I'll stay in Scotland where I am, and I'll take you to 1999, Jean Van de Velde. I think everyone, you could actually ask people almost, they might forget who won that event. But Van de Velde's, again, talking back to that era of images, the image of him standing in the water, the image of what happened on the 18th. But I think he'd be the first one chipped into the Mount Rushmore.
I go number 1. My first pick would be also fairly obvious, Roberto Di Vincenzo. Let me try that again. Roberto Di Vincenzo, who really won the tournament and then signed an incorrect scorecard. And in fact, we talked about the tent next to the 18th green. What happened to Di Vincenzo completely changed the way the Masters scored rounds. And in fact, they had been warned about it before, and we're in classic Augusta fashion now. It'll be fine. Nothing will ever happen. And instead we have this. And, if you randomly put a gun to my head on any given day, I'd be hard pressed to tell you who won that Masters, including as we're recording right now.
Completely.
Colby, maybe? I truly don't know. And so that's my pick for that.
Yeah, I think another easy one. And if we consider Norman on those with those 2, I think the last one would probably be the Tom Watson versus Stuart Sink. I think everyone picturing it wasn't, Norman has another run at a major, probably his closest run he has. He leads, I think, is it the 2008 Open? He leads after 54 holes and he doesn't get it done as a sort of elder statesman. But Watson the next year at 58 doesn't get over the line famously on the last hole, but that is considered sort of the Disneyland script that never happened. So I'd probably chisel that one in, and there might be some honorable mentions, but I think that's a 4 probably that stand out.
Yeah, I think that's good.
I'll quickly recap the awards, and then let's do just maybe how it changed the game. We could discuss that quickly. So
yeah.
Just recapping first up, the what if moment. What would be your what if moment from throughout the whole, everything that we've covered? What do you think was the tipping point?
For me, the great historical what if is what if Phil Mickelson had been in the final group with him. I think that's the moment. The final round just seems like such a fait accompli in a way that it's hard to pick a moment where it's like, oh, what if he had made this putt or hit that shot? I think if he had a more comfortable final round pairing, who knows? But I think that was really bad for him that Faldo made that birdie and scramble to stay with him.
Well, my vote's going to go for the Costas moment, the sort of the whispers behind Augusta National. And just because it is essentially sliding doors, 2 men meeting in sort of under a tree behind the media center on Saturday night leads to this broadcast going out Sunday that maybe confirms in Norman's head somehow he's watching. Maybe Norman knew all along and he just didn't want to admit it, and then De Bruyne, and then the Costas moment on the local broadcast showing it the next Monday. The morning of Sunday. I just think what could have happened if he maybe just could keep that cloak of doubt away until he teed off. So I'll go with that. But what about the Kim Jong-un award here for your favorite stat that we uncovered that's would only be believable in the 96 Masters?
Jamie, I liked your Tiger Woods stat. I thought that was wonderful. I think it was great, and that'll be mine. I'm sure I'm forgetting better ones, but yeah, that'll stay in my head.
No, I came up with that one too, so that one's going to be mine. Leading the field at 342 yards, and it's never been beaten since. And we're 30 years on now. So, what about Shane as the Big J journalist, the best writer I know? Your favorite quote, headline, or tweet from the event? What would you go with?
Well, first of all, you're too kind, but I have two that I have not unleashed yet that I love.
Okay.
First one from Rick Riley. We talked about Riley's story. But he goes back to the 18th green, and he talks about Nick Faldo making that birdie putt. And he describes him, we talked about how classy Faldo was, but how he kind of understood the moment. He describes him as looking like, quote, a man in the back of a church who would want a clandestine hand of gin. I was like, man, that is really good. That is really, really good. And on the broadcast, it totally checks out. You look at it, he's like, there's a certain amount of happiness there, but more is just sort of like, I can't really.
Back to the awkwardness of the hug, right? Yeah.
Now, the other quote I want to throw at you, and I'm stealing this one from the 30 for 30, the documentary, but Brandel Chambly was interviewed in that, and he quoted another journalist named Haywood Brown, who wrote way back in the day, a sports journalist, maybe not a sports journalist, but the quote is really poignant, and it is, the tragedy of life is not that man loses, but that he almost wins. And I thought, how perfect for Greg Norman. Right? If Greg Norman was somebody who missed every cut, he wouldn't be the Greg Norman we know. The tragedy of him,
syndrome,
the tragedy of him is that he was always there, and he kept coming back. Glutton for punishment.
Yeah, one of Norman's quotes that he is credited for, to be fair, I don't think anybody else would lay claim to this, is that I saw in a lot of interviews afterwards, is that you expect success, but you respect failure. And maybe he's the only one, the one out of all the golfers in this era that could have come up with a quote like that. It's not I think, honestly, my quote, I'm maybe not as serious as you are, but I really like that Dan Jenkins, when he was young, he looks like the man you sent out to kill James Bond. I just always,
that's wonderful.
That tickles me every time. But the only other one that I put in contention was Lee Trevino had a famous quote about Norman from after this, and his quote was that God never gives a golfer everything. He always holds something back. Jack Nicklaus didn't get a sandwich, and Greg Norman didn't get any luck. So Lee's always good for a quote. So
absolutely.
Okay, we were casting the film here, Shane. Who is your favorite or best supporting actor?
So this one, I think of Wolf of Wall Street when Matthew McConaughey does his like the chest thumping scene. He's not in that movie for very long, but he steals the show completely. And for me, that's Tiger here. Tiger, not only did we got to see him in brief scenes in the practice rounds, but the hint of him, the aura of him is all around. Our ominous sense of what the future holds, what's coming in a year. I mean, Tiger Woods is the presence that haunts this entire Masters.
Yeah, my best supporting actor is De Bruyne. I just love that scene. I actually, do you know what's funny? And I didn't. Sorry, it's not funny. I shouldn't say that. But one of the things I find amazing in going back to read the research is obviously De Bruyne's sitting at the end of the bar, says, "Not even you could fuck this up" to Norman, and it's the first thing that Norman often quotes when he talks about it. Yeah. Kind of sad in a way that they had a very good relationship. De Bruyne dies in August of this year. So this is the last Masters he covers. Maybe his last act at Augusta is this quote. I couldn't find anything that he wrote about the Sunday. And so I think that if this was a movie about the 96 Masters, I think De Bruyne is a ghost.
That is good. That is good. Yeah.
I don't think he was ever there. I think he passed away 6 months before. And Norman,
Greg Norman's in the bar going, "Did you hear what he just said?"
Yeah.
People are like, "Who, Greg? Who
Greg
said?"
Norman is spinning so quickly on Saturday night that he just sees De Bruyne. And I would like to cast Paul Giamatti as De Bruyne at the end of the bar. I don't know. I've always pictured that, but
Here's something interesting for you, Jamie, that completely recasts that moment. And I think it's in Riley's story. Don't quote me on that, but in Riley's story, he doesn't mention De Bruyne. He talks about someone coming in and saying to Norman in a very enthusiastic way, "Not even you can fuck this up, Greg," but less sort of wry and British the way we think of it, and more like you just kind of described, like they have a good relationship. Someone's really happy for him and is, making a little bit of a joke about it, but essentially it's a positive thing. And doesn't that change things a little bit? Doesn't that kind of, because you picture a wry old Brit at the end of a bar kind of making a crack, but what if it's somebody who's friends with Norman? What if it's somebody who's rooting for him? That's completely different.
And I think there was definitely a tension between media and Norman throughout his whole career, really, but especially now. And that's what I found interesting when De Bruyne passes away later, because he wrote for Golf Digest as well. And so I was reading one of the tributes to him, and the first person quoted is Greg Norman. And you think 4 months earlier he has this influence in what maybe happens on Sunday. So for Norman, obviously had a good relationship. So maybe there's something else there. But right, 2 awards left to give out. So we've got. I really like this one. This is ripped off the Rewatchables podcast that we both like. But what piece of memorabilia would you take from the 1996 Masters, Shane?
Oh, Jamie. Okay, this is one I didn't prepare for. Let me think. You go first, and let me think while you're talking. This is like at a restaurant where the waiter comes, and you're like, there's just so many good stuffs on the menu. You guys go first.
You can kick it back. There's a lot of fun ones to be had here. I probably have two. I think I'd like the shirt that Greg Norman wore. I've talked about his fashion throughout this, and that sort of striped shirt that he wore, pictured in this, it's sort of like Tommy Fleetwood wore a shirt similar to it at Portrush in 2019. But I just always like a sort of game worn shirt, and I think that would be cool to have. And people walk in your house, and that's a shirt that Norman collapsed in, quite literally. But I thought about that, or maybe a signed photo of the two of them hugging. If you had both players sign it, it's kind of a cool thing to have. But I guess that doesn't really exist. So give me Norman's shirt.
Okay, I want to take the divot he made on number 12 when he hits the ball in the water.
That's good.
Not only because it's a piece of history, but famously the Masters doesn't like when you take divots. So, and they will prosecute you. They have prosecuted people for doing that. So if you could just bring this divot to my house with nobody knowing, I'd have a piece of history, and maybe I'd grow a backyard full of Augusta grass.
I like that a lot. Built from the disaster of 96. So, and then the last award here, Shane, and we can probably sort of tie it into wrapping this all up in terms of how it changed golf, but the category is unintended consequence. So all these big events that we're going to cover throughout this podcast series sort of have an impact in the game, but maybe this is more of a subtle one. Have you got anything there?
So, well, this isn't very subtle. I'll tell you, my answer to this is not very subtle, but the things that drove Greg Norman's personality, we talked about seeking the approval of his father. We talked about the disappointments he suffered, his antagonistic relationship with the PGA Tour. Maybe this didn't change any of that, but I can't help. There's just that little part of my brain that can't help going, butterfly flapping its wings, and there's a tsunami 20 years later. How is this whole live golf thing different if he wins that Masters? If all he needed, it's so crazy. All he needed was one Masters, right? To kind of change the complete narrative of his career. He never got it. If he had won in 96, how does it change his personality? How does it change his sense of contentment? How does it change, the fact that he later became the spokesperson and one of the driving forces behind Live? And it's an unanswerable question, right? We're dealing with complete hypotheticals, but that is really top of brain.
It really slaps me when I think about this, and I don't know why. I think I'm just a cynic, but the fact that he would go on to develop a tour where the winner is crowned after 54 holes.
Yeah, it's an easy joke, but a great one.
And I went back and looked. If you're a golf nerd like we are, Wikipedia grids mean a lot to you, and the colors of them on everything. And I went back and created the 54-hole major grid for Greg Norman, and he would have finished his career with 8 majors.
Unbelievable.
And Rory McIlroy this is 2026. Rory McIlroy has led after the 54 holes in a major 6 times. Greg Norman led 8, and he won 1 of those. And like we've said, the heartbreaks were much higher than anyone else's. And there's some, to your point, I did think about the live stuff. Obviously it had a huge impact, but I can't get over the fact that he would go. I mean, if you were to write the script, People thought Happy Gilmore 2's script was a bit wild, but the script of losing all these 54 hole leads and then inventing a tour or being the spokesperson of a tour that they crown the winner after 54 holes, it really tickles me.
You have to imagine the first time you heard that joke going, oh no. I didn't think about that. Well, Jimmy, maybe this is a good place to close. I don't know, but let me give you a hypothetical that I've been thinking about as we've been speaking here. Would you rather be, you have two career options. Would you rather be Greg Norman, who does win 2 majors, but has a history of kind of losing these, is the most infamous, choker's a tough word, but really that's what we think of him in golf history? Or would you rather be Lee Westwood, somebody who rose to number 1 in the world and never won a major, but maybe doesn't have the dramatic sort of failures that Norman has?
I thought you were going to give me Faldo for a second. I was like, give me the 6 majors.
Oh, yeah. That's not even a question. No, that's way too easy.
It's tough. I think just with all the research that we've done for this and how many times I've just relived that week in my head, it feels like in every moment that Greg Norman has after this and all the interviews and all the live stuff and all the times he gets into contention in golf tournaments again, this event defined him. This event is what you think of first. If you close your eyes and think Greg Norman, you think of the moment of him collapsing or the 9th or the hug or whatever. And so it just hovers over him for the rest of his career and will do probably for the rest of the time golf's ever played. Whereas like you say, with someone like Lee Westwood, he just had success, but he didn't have the huge heartbreaks. And I just don't think that failure lives on him like it does with Norman. So my inclination is to say Norman, but I don't think you can. I think you'd have to go with, crazy as it is, like obviously if you're ever going to play golf, the way that he won the 2 majors as well was great. But like we said before, he's such a fictional character throughout all of this and in the build up to it and everything you shed light on in his past. And he's such a caricature of what a sort of villain and someone coming from Australia, from the past that he had and everything that happened in his childhood to this point. I just think, I just can't quite believe that we have someone like this in the game.
Yeah, great answer. Well, Jamie, I think that does it for us. This was a thorough look at one of the most heartbreaking moments in golf, and I think a pretty apt way to start our little series here. So from my perspective, sir, it was a complete pleasure.
I enjoyed it very much too, and I think there's no doubt that it changed golf, the fact that we're still talking about it 30 years later and everything that is brought up every time it comes around. But that was things that changed golf. Thanks to Shane, thanks to Greg, thanks for listening. More soon.